Hook. He typed 5 words that were supposed to end his career. Victoria Sterling is a nightmare. But instead of sending it to his best friend, Ethan Parker sent it directly to the most powerful woman in Chicago advertising, his own CEO. What happened next didn't just save his job. It uncovered a betrayal that had been rotting inside the company for years. And it started a love story neither of them saw coming. Stay with me until the very end of this story. If it reaches you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Part 1. The fluorescent lights in the 37th floor office of Pinnacle Media Group had a particular hum that Ethan Parker had learned to tune out over the past 6 years. It was the kind of sound you stopped hearing after your first month, like the rattle of the L train, or the way Lake Michigan wind could slice through even the thickest winter coat. Chicago had a way of grinding down your senses until you only noticed the big things, the loud things, the things that could actually hurt you. Tonight was not one of those loud moments. Tonight was quiet, the kind of late Thursday quiet where most normal people had already gone home to their families, their dogs, their takeout containers, and Netflix queues. The creative department was empty except for Ethan, who sat hunched over his desk surrounded by the scattered wreckage of a campaign pitch that had been ripped apart in an afternoon meeting. Red ink from the printed feedback sheets bled through the pages like tiny wounds. He rubbed his eyes and checked his phone. 8:47 p.m. His mother had texted him 40 minutes ago. Lily fell asleep on the couch watching that penguin documentary again. Take your time, sweetheart. We're fine. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. We're fine. His mother said that a lot. She'd been saying it since Sarah died, actually. Those first terrible weeks when Lily was only 3 and couldn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming back from the hospital, and Ethan couldn't explain it because he barely understood it himself. His mother had moved in temporarily back then. The temporary part was now approaching its 5th year. He should go home. He knew that. Lily would wake up at 6:30 tomorrow morning, regardless of when he walked through the door, and she'd want pancakes, and she'd want to tell him about whatever she'd learned at school, and she'd need him to be present and not half asleep and distracted by work. That was the deal he had made with himself after Sarah's funeral. Lily comes first. Everything else, the career, the promotions, the late nights, all of it was supposed to serve that one promise. But promises had a way of bending under pressure. The campaign spread across his desk was for Hartwell Luxuries, a high-end watch brand that wanted to break into the younger market. Victoria Sterling, Pinnacle's CEO, had personally taken interest in the account, which meant the entire creative team was operating under a microscope. Every headline got scrutinized. Every visual concept got dissected. The brief had been rewritten 3 times in 2 weeks, and the latest round of feedback, delivered through Victoria's executive assistant with surgical detachment, had essentially asked Ethan's team to start from scratch. Bold but approachable, the feedback said. Aspirational but authentic. Timeless but modern. Ethan wanted to ask what those words even meant when you stacked them together like that. Bold but approachable. That was like asking someone to whisper aggressively. He picked up his phone and opened his text thread with Marcus Webb, his best friend since college. Marcus worked in logistics for a shipping company downtown, which meant he understood absolutely nothing about advertising, but was always willing to listen to Ethan complain about it. Their friendship had survived on a foundation of mutual venting, shared custody of a fantasy football team, and an unspoken agreement to never let more than 3 days pass without checking in. Ethan's thumbs moved fast across the screen, fueled by exhaustion and frustration. Dude, I swear Victoria Sterling is running this place like some kind of psychological experiment. 3rd rewrite in 2 weeks. She wants bold but approachable, whatever that means. The woman is a nightmare wrapped in a designer suit. I'm losing my mind over here. He hit send without looking, set the phone down, and leaned back in his chair. For exactly 11 seconds, Ethan felt the sweet relief of having said something he probably shouldn't have said. It was the same feeling as loosening your tie after a long meeting or kicking off dress shoes after a 12-hour day. Brief. Wonderful. Completely irresponsible. Then he glanced at the screen. The message hadn't gone to Marcus Webb. It had gone to the contact directly below Marcus in his phone, a contact he'd only added 2 days ago when Victoria's assistant had distributed her direct number to the campaign team leads for Urgent communication purposes only. Victoria Sterling. The text sat there in its little blue bubble, cheerful and permanent and absolutely catastrophic. Ethan's stomach dropped so fast he thought he might actually throw up on his keyboard. He grabbed the phone with both hands like it was a live grenade. His first instinct was to delete the message, but this wasn't email. You couldn't unsend a text once it was delivered, and the little word beneath the bubble confirmed the worst. Delivered. No, he said out loud to the empty office. No, no, no. He typed frantically to Marcus, the real Marcus this time. I just sent a text about Victoria to Victoria. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Marcus was a night owl. Wait, what kind of text about Victoria? The kind where I called her a nightmare wrapped in a designer suit. A pause. Then, bro, I know. To her face? Well, to her phone? Yes, Marcus. To her phone. What do I do? You got a passport? You could be in Canada by morning. This is not funny. I have a kid. I have a mortgage. I have a car payment on a Honda Civic that's already making a weird noise. Okay, maybe she won't see it tonight. Maybe she'll think it's a joke. Maybe she'll respect the honesty. Ethan wanted to reach through the phone and shake his best friend. Nobody in the history of corporate America had ever respected an employee calling them a nightmare. That wasn't how power worked. That wasn't how anything worked. He sat there for 10 minutes, cycling through every stage of grief in rapid succession. Denial. Maybe the message didn't actually send. He checked again. It had. Anger. Why did phone contacts have to be alphabetical? Who designed this system? Bargaining. Maybe he could text her right now and claim he'd been hacked. Depression. He was definitely going to lose his job, which meant losing his health insurance, which meant Lily's upcoming dental appointment would cost a fortune. Acceptance. He was going to die alone in this office, surrounded by bad campaign drafts and the faint smell of old coffee. Eventually, Ethan did the only thing he could do. He packed his bag, turned off his desk lamp, and drove home through the dark Chicago streets with his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His mother was reading on the couch when he walked in. She looked up and immediately frowned. You look terrible. Thanks, Mom. I mean it. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't from a vending machine? Ethan dropped his bag by the door and walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, stared at its contents without seeing them, and closed it again. I might lose my job, he said. His mother set down her book. What happened? I sent a text to the wrong person. What kind of text? The kind you send to your buddy about your boss. Except I sent it to my boss. Margaret Parker had raised 2 children, buried a husband, and spent 30 years teaching high school English in the South Side. Very little rattled her. But even she took a moment with this one. How bad was it? I called her a nightmare. Was that all? Wrapped in a designer suit. Margaret pressed her lips together. Ethan could tell she was fighting the urge to laugh, which somehow made everything worse. It's not funny, Mom. I didn't say it was funny. You're doing the face, the one where you think something is funny but you're pretending it's not. I'm doing no such face. I'm concerned for your career. Yeah, well, join the club. He checked on Lily before going to bed. She was curled up in her small bedroom, her dark hair fanned across the pillow, one arm wrapped around a stuffed otter she'd named Professor Whiskers. The room was a carefully controlled chaos of science posters, library books stacked on every surface, and a half-finished model of the solar system hanging from the ceiling by fishing line. Jupiter was missing. It had fallen behind the dresser 3 weeks ago, and neither of them had gotten around to retrieving it. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. This was the part of his day that always recalibrated everything. The quiet reminder that no matter how badly things went at work, this small person needed him to keep showing up. He'd survived worse than a bad text message. He'd survived losing Sarah. He'd survived the first year alone with a toddler who kept asking where Mommy was. He'd survived learning how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m. A text message wasn't going to break him. He told himself that 3 more times before falling asleep. He almost believed it by the 3rd time. The summons came at 8:15 the next morning. delivered by Victoria Sterling's executive assistant, Diane Chen, who appeared at Ethan's desk like a ghost in a gray blazer. Ms. Sterling would like to see you in her office. Now, please. Diane said please the way a judge says, will the defendant please rise? Technically polite, but carrying the full weight of institutional authority. There was no world in which please meant optional. Ethan followed Diane through the main floor, past rows of workstations where his colleagues were just settling into their mornings. A few people glanced up. Nobody said anything, but Ethan could feel the low-level curiosity humming through the space. Getting summoned to the CEO's office before the first coffee run was never a good sign. The executive floor of Pinnacle Media Group occupied the top 2 stories of a renovated building on Michigan Avenue. The lower floors were all open concept, exposed brick, and collaborative energy. The kind of workspace designed to make young creatives feel like they were working at a startup rather than a mid-size advertising firm. But the executive floor was different. Up here, the ceilings were higher, the carpets were thicker, and the silence had a weight to it that made you aware of every sound you made. Victoria's office sat at the far end of a long hallway, behind double glass doors that were partially frosted for privacy. Through the clear portions, Ethan could see the corner of a massive desk, a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, and the outline of a woman standing with her back to the door. Diane opened the door, gestured him inside, and disappeared. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded, to Ethan's catastrophizing brain, exactly like a trap snapping shut. Victoria Sterling didn't turn around immediately. She was standing under the windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline, with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other. She was tall, maybe 5'9", and carried herself with the kind of posture that suggested years of either ballet training or boardroom survival. Probably both. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low twist, and she was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's car payment. Everything about her, the deliberate pause, the window gazing, the perfectly timed silence, felt choreographed to make him as uncomfortable as possible, and it was working. Sit down, Mr. Parker. Ethan sat in one of the 2 leather chairs facing her desk. The chair was exactly the right height to make him feel small, which he suspected was intentional. Victoria turned around. She was younger than the corporate mythology suggested. 30, maybe 31, with sharp brown eyes and the kind of face that revealed absolutely nothing unless she wanted it to. Ethan had been with Pinnacle for 6 years and had never been in the same room as her alone. She existed mostly as a signature on company emails, a distant figure at quarterly meetings, and the subject of endless hallway speculation. She sat down across from him, set her phone on the desk, screen up, angled so he couldn't see it, and took a slow sip of coffee. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. Ethan considered lying. He considered saying something clever or disarming. He considered blaming a non-existent hacker or a phone malfunction or temporary insanity caused by fluorescent light exposure. Instead, because he was too tired to perform and too scared to strategize, he told the truth. "Because I sent you a text last night calling you a nightmare. And I'm guessing this meeting is where you fire me." Victoria's expression didn't change, not a flicker. She picked up her phone, unlocked it, and read the message aloud in the same tone someone might use to recite a grocery list. "Victoria Sterling is running this place like some kind of psychological experiment. 3rd rewrite in 2 weeks. She wants bold but approachable, whatever that means. The woman is a nightmare wrapped in a designer suit. I'm losing my mind over here." She set the phone down. "That was meant for someone else, I assume." "My friend Marcus, he works in shipping logistics. He doesn't even know what a creative brief is." "And does Marcus agree that I'm a nightmare?" "Marcus thinks everyone's boss is a nightmare. It's kind of his worldview." The tiniest crack appeared at the corner of Victoria's mouth. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Then it was gone. "Mr. Parker, I'm not going to fire you." Ethan blinked. "You're not?" "No." "Because I'm pretty sure that text qualifies as gross insubordination?" "Probably." "Grounds for immediate termination under Section 4 of the Employee Handbook?" "Definitely. But I'm not going to fire you, and I'll tell you why." She leaned back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being appraised the way you might appraise a painting you weren't sure about. Interesting enough to examine, but not yet worth buying. How much do you know about the company's internal politics, Mr. Parker? I know the vending machine on 12 has been broken for 3 months and nobody's fixed it. I mean the board. Ethan shifted in his chair. I know there are board members. I know they have meetings. Beyond that, I just do my job and try not to think about what happens above my pay grade. Victoria nodded slowly. That's the smart approach. Most employees don't concern themselves with governance, and they shouldn't have to. But I'm going to tell you something that I probably shouldn't, because right now I need someone who has nothing to do with the politics of this company, and your little text message just proved that you're willing to say what you actually think. She stood and walked to a small credenza near the windows, where she poured a second cup of coffee. She brought it back and set it in front of Ethan without asking if he wanted it. He took it. It was significantly better than the break room stuff. There are 11 people on Pinnacle's board of directors, Victoria said. 7 of them support my leadership. 4 of them, led by a man named Leonard Graves, have been quietly working to remove me for the better part of a year. Ethan frowned. Remove you? You're the CEO. I'm a 30-year-old woman running a company that Leonard Graves thinks should be run by someone who looks like him. Older, male, more interested in tradition than innovation. He's been on this board for 22 years, and he considers my appointment a personal insult. That sounds like a board problem. What does it have to do with me? Victoria sat back down. Leonard is smart. He doesn't attack directly. He erodes. He questions decisions in meetings. He leaks minor concerns to the press. He creates an atmosphere of doubt. And recently, he's been looking for ammunition. Any mistake, any scandal, any hint of unprofessional behavior from me, he'll use it. She paused and looked directly at Ethan. An employee sending a disrespectful text message to the CEO. In Leonard's hands, that becomes a story about poor company culture under my leadership. Or worse, if he finds out I didn't fire you, it becomes a story about favoritism. A story about why Victoria Sterling can't maintain professional standards. Ethan felt the coffee turn sour in his stomach. So you should fire me. That's one option. What's the other option? Victoria leaned forward slightly. The Hartwell campaign, the one you've been working on. The one you've had us rewrite 3 times. The one I've had you rewrite 3 times because the first 2 versions were safe and forgettable. And safe and forgettable won't save this company. She folded her hands on the desk. Hartwell Luxuries is the biggest account Pinnacle has pursued in 3 years. If we land it, the revenue stabilizes the company for the next 5 quarters. If we lose it, Leonard will use the failure to push for a leadership change at the next shareholder meeting. And you want me to, what, lead the campaign? I want you to co-lead it, with me, directly. Ethan stared at her. You want to work directly with the guy who called you a nightmare. I want to work with the guy who's honest enough to say what he thinks, even when he's exhausted and not paying attention to who he's texting. Do you know how rare that is in this building? Everyone here performs for me. They tell me what they think I want to hear. They soften their feedback. They smile when they disagree. I've been running this company for 2 years, and your text message is the most honest piece of communication I've received from anyone below the executive level. She wasn't flattering him. Ethan could tell the difference. There was no warmth in her voice, no attempt to make him feel special. She was stating a calculation. He was useful, and she needed useful. What exactly would this look like? He asked. Late nights, strategy sessions, direct collaboration with me and a small team. You'd keep your regular role, but the Hartwell campaign would be your priority. The pitch is in 6 weeks. I have a daughter. I know. Ethan looked up, surprised. Your HR file mentions you're a single parent, Victoria said. I reviewed it this morning. Your daughter is 8. Her name is Lily. Your emergency contact is your mother, Margaret Parker, who lives at your address. You memorized my HR file. I memorize everything that's relevant to a decision I'm making. She paused. If timing is a constraint, we can work around it. I don't need you here past 7 most nights, but when you're here, I need your full attention and your real opinions, not the polished version you present in department meetings. Ethan looked at the coffee cup in his hands. He thought about Lily, about the mortgage, about the Honda making weird noises, about how the job market for mid-level creatives in Chicago was roughly as forgiving as Lake Michigan in February. Then he thought about what Victoria had said, about honesty, about someone actually wanting to hear what he thought rather than what was safe to say. It had been a long time since someone had asked him for that. "Okay," he said, "but I have conditions." Victoria raised an eyebrow. The gesture contained approximately 12 layers of skepticism. "If I'm giving you honest opinions, I need to know you're not going to punish me for them later. I'm not interested in being the guy who gets to speak freely until he says something you don't like." "Fair." "And I need to leave by 6:30 on Wednesdays. Lily has a science club that ends at 6, and my mom has book club on Wednesdays, so I do pickup." "Done." "And the text, the one I sent, I need to know that's buried, not held over my head, not referenced in performance reviews, not saved as leverage." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. It was subtle, a slight softening around the eyes, like a door opening half an inch. "Mr. Parker, if I wanted leverage over you, I would have fired you and used the termination as a warning to the entire company. I don't need leverage. I need competence." Ethan nodded. He finished his coffee and stood up. "Then I guess we're doing this. We start Monday. Diane will send you the full campaign brief over the weekend. Read every page." "All of them?" "It's 147 pages. That's going to be a fun weekend." "Mr. Parker?" He turned back at the door. "The text was funny," Victoria said. Her face was perfectly neutral. "The designer suit part specifically. But if you ever put something like that in writing again, I'll make sure your next career opportunity is writing copy for the back of cereal boxes." Ethan left her office and walked directly to the men's room, where he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection and tried to figure out what had just happened. He had expected to be fired. Instead, he'd been recruited by the woman he'd insulted for a project that apparently had the power to determine the company's entire future. His phone buzzed. Marcus. "So? You still employed?" Somehow, yes, she didn't care about the text. She cared. She just cared about something else more. That's either really good or really bad. Ethan thought about that for a moment. He had no idea which one it was. But for the first time in a long time, his life at Pinnacle felt like something other than routine. Damn. The weekend disappeared into 147 pages of market analysis, brand positioning documents, competitor landscapes, and consumer demographic breakdowns. Ethan spread it all across the dining room table Saturday morning and didn't look up until Lily appeared beside him holding Professor Whiskers and wearing an expression of serious concern. "Daddy, are you reading homework?" "Sort of. Grown-up homework." "Is it for school?" "It's for work." "That's worse." She climbed into the chair beside him and looked at the papers with the focused intensity of an 8-year-old inspecting something she suspects might be boring. "What's this about?" she asked, pointing at a chart. "It's about watches. Like the ones that tell time? Like the ones that cost as much as our car." Lily considered this information. "That's dumb." "Don't tell my boss that." "Why not? If the watches are dumb, someone should say so." Ethan looked at his daughter and felt a wave of helpless affection. She had Sarah's directness, that unsettling ability to strip a situation down to its simplest truth and present it without apology. Sarah used to do the same thing. In meetings, at dinner parties, during arguments, she'd say the thing everyone was thinking but nobody was willing to say, and somehow she'd make it sound reasonable instead of rude. Lily had inherited that gift, along with Sarah's dark brown eyes and her particular habit of chewing her lower lip when she was concentrating hard. "You're right," Ethan told her. "The watches are kind of dumb. But my job is to make people feel like they're not dumb." "That sounds hard." "It really is." Margaret appeared in the doorway with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Eat something, both of you. The papers aren't going anywhere." They ate together. The three of them crowded around the table between stacks of campaign documents and Lily's school folder, which she'd placed on top of a brand strategy report with territorial precision. Ethan caught himself smiling. This was the architecture of his life. Small, messy, improvised, held together by his mother's stubbornness and Lily's insistence on being included in everything. After breakfast, Lily went to her room to work on her current obsession, a hand-drawn field guide to every insect she'd found in the backyard. She was on page 14. The latest entry was a detailed sketch of a beetle she'd named Captain Crunch. Ethan spent the rest of Saturday and most of Sunday buried in the Hartwell brief. By Sunday evening, he had a notebook full of ideas, 3 potential campaign concepts, and a headache that felt like someone had parked a truck on his forehead. But underneath the exhaustion, something else was stirring. A feeling he hadn't had in a long time. The brief wasn't just dense, it was interesting. The challenge of making luxury feel accessible without cheapening it, of speaking to younger consumers without patronizing them, of building a brand narrative that honored tradition while embracing change. It was the kind of creative problem that reminded Ethan why he'd gotten into advertising in the first place, before the grief, before the survival mode, before he'd started treating his job as nothing more than a paycheck. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at Pinnacle 30 minutes early, which was a personal record that stunned even Margaret. He brought his notebook, 2 backup pens, and a travel mug of coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon. Diane met him outside Victoria's office at 8 sharp. "She's expecting you. Go in." The office looked different in daylight. The morning sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, throwing long geometric shadows across the desk. Victoria was already at work, her jacket off, sleeves of her white blouse rolled to the elbows, 3 screens open in front of her showing spreadsheets and email chains and what looked like a live stock ticker. She glanced up when he entered. "You read the brief?" "All 147 pages." "And?" Ethan sat down in the same leather chair from Friday. "The brand positioning is solid, but plays it too safe. Hartwell keeps talking about heritage and craftsmanship, which is fine for their existing customers, but younger buyers don't care about a 100-year-old Swiss workshop. They care about what the watch says about who they are right now." Victoria leaned back. "Go on." "The competitor analysis shows that every luxury watch brand is selling the same story. Timeless elegance, legacy, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's talking about what luxury means to someone who's 28 and just landed their first real job. For them, buying a nice watch isn't about heritage. It's about proving something to themselves. It's personal, it's emotional, and it's a little bit reckless. Reckless. In a good way. Like, you just spent 2 months' rent on something you didn't need because you wanted to feel like you'd arrived somewhere. That's not rational behavior. It's emotional behavior. And the campaign should speak to that instead of pretending luxury is some kind of logical decision. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Ethan couldn't read her expression. He wondered if he'd overstepped, if this was the moment where his big, honest opinion got him shipped back to the creative bullpen. "That's the first interesting thing anyone said to me about this campaign in 3 months," Victoria said quietly. "Write it up. 3 concepts. Full creative direction. I want to see them Wednesday." "Wednesday? That's 2 days. Is that a problem?" It was absolutely a problem. 2 days for 3 full concepts was insane. But something in Victoria's voice, not aggressive exactly, more like testing, made Ethan swallow his objections. "I'll have them by Wednesday." "Good. Now shut the door and sit down. We need to talk about the pitch structure." They worked for 4 hours straight. Victoria's mind moved fast, faster than anyone Ethan had worked with. She could hold 3 different strategic frameworks in her head simultaneously and switch between them without missing a beat. But she also listened. When Ethan pushed back on an approach, she didn't shut him down. She pressed harder, asked better questions, forced him to articulate why he disagreed until the disagreement either solidified into a real objection or dissolved into something they could work with. It was exhausting. It was also the most stimulating professional experience Ethan had had in years. Around noon, Diane brought in sandwiches. Victoria ate hers while reviewing a financial report, managing to look completely composed while simultaneously getting mustard on her thumb and pretending she hadn't. Ethan caught the moment. The tiny flicker of annoyance, the quick wipe on a napkin, the reset to perfect composure, and filed it away. It was the first time she'd looked even remotely human. "You're staring," Victoria said without looking up. "You got mustard on your hand." "I'm aware. Just making sure." She looked up then, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with watch campaigns or board politics or professional boundaries. It was small and fast and completely undefined, the kind of moment that only matters in retrospect, when you look back and realize that's where it started. Then it was gone. Back to work, Victoria said. Section 3 of the pitch deck needs restructuring. Ethan opened his notebook. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. Right, sorry, Ms. Sterling. Victoria's fine when we're working in here. Ms. Sterling is for meetings where I need people to feel slightly afraid of me. Ethan almost smiled. He caught himself and turned it into a cough. They worked until 5:30 when Ethan packed up his things and headed for the door. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Victoria said. Bring the first concept draft. It won't be done by tomorrow. I know. Bring whatever you have. I'd rather see rough and honest than polished and empty. Ethan stopped at the door and turned back. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why me? You have a whole creative department, senior people, people with bigger titles and more experience. Why pull in a mid-level creative director for the most important campaign in the company? Victoria set down her pen. She looked at him with that same appraising expression from Friday, like she was deciding how much to reveal. Because everyone else in this building is afraid of me, she said, and afraid people make boring work. Ethan nodded slowly. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Mr. Parker. He left Pinnacle that evening with his head buzzing and his notebook full of scrawled ideas and a strange sensation in his chest that he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until he was in the car, driving through the amber glow of Michigan Avenue at dusk, that he recognized it. It was excitement, the pure, uncomplicated kind, the kind he hadn't felt about work since his first year in the industry. He called Marcus from the car. How's the nightmare, Sue? Marcus asked. Surprisingly not terrible. That's what they all say before the nightmare really begins. Thanks for the support. Anytime. Hey, you coming to Trivia Thursday? Danny says the team's been losing without you. Can't, I'll probably be working late. On the Nightmares project? On Victoria's project, yeah. There was a pause on Marcus's end. You just called her Victoria. That's her name. Last week she was the Nightmare wrapped in a designer suit. Now she's Victoria. That's a pretty fast rebrand, buddy. It's professional, Marcus. She asked me to use her first name. Uh-huh. Shut up. I didn't say anything. Your silence said plenty. I gotta go. Lily's waiting. He hung up and pulled into his street. The porch light was on. Through the front window, he could see Lily at the kitchen table, hunched over what was probably her insect guide, with Margaret standing at the stove behind her. Ethan sat in the car for an extra minute, just looking at the scene through the window. The warm light. The small figures moving inside. The ordinary miracle of a family waiting for him to come home. Then he went inside, and Lily jumped up to show him her latest beetle drawing, and Margaret handed him a plate of chicken and rice, and the evening folded itself around him like it always did. Warm and chaotic and exactly right. He didn't check his phone again until after Lily was in bed. When he did, there was a message from an unknown number that turned out to be Victoria's assistant forwarding campaign files. And beneath that, a text from Victoria herself. Just 2 words. Good start. Ethan stared at the message for longer than he should have. Then he plugged in his phone, turned off the light, and lay in the dark listening to the familiar sounds of his house. The heater ticking, Lily mumbling in her sleep down the hall, the distant rumble of a train somewhere to the south. Something was changing. He could feel it the way you feel weather shifting. Not in anything specific, but in the air itself, in the quality of the silence between sounds. He didn't know yet what it was becoming, but for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. The first 2 weeks of the Hartwell campaign passed in a blur of late nights, cold coffee, and the particular kind of creative exhaustion that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Ethan had forgotten what it was like to work at this intensity. Not the grinding, soul-crushing kind of hard work he'd been doing for years, but the kind that actually demanded something from the deepest parts of his brain. The kind that left him drained but buzzing, like a muscle that had been dormant so long it ached when it finally got used again. Victoria was relentless. She didn't micromanage. That wasn't her style. Instead, she operated more like a surgeon during a 12-hour operation, calm, precise, and completely unwilling to accept anything less than the best version of whatever was on the table. When Ethan brought her his 3 initial concepts on that first Wednesday, she'd read through all of them in silence, set 2 of them aside, and pointed at the third. This one. But the tagline is weak and the visual strategy needs rethinking. Can you have a revised version by Friday? If I don't sleep, sure. Then don't sleep. She'd said it without smiling, and Ethan had spent the next 30 seconds trying to figure out if she was joking. He eventually decided she was, but only about 40%. By the end of the second week, they'd established a rhythm that neither of them had explicitly agreed to, but both seemed to understand. Mornings were for independent work, Ethan with his creative team, Victoria with her executive obligations. Afternoons were for collaborative sessions in her office, usually starting around 2 and stretching until Ethan had to leave for Lily. The sessions were intense, argumentative, and occasionally frustrating in ways that felt productive rather than destructive. The thing about Victoria that took Ethan the longest to understand was that she wasn't cold. He'd assumed she was. Everyone at Pinnacle assumed she was. The Ice Queen CEO, untouchable and unknowable, running the company with the emotional warmth of a spreadsheet. But working alongside her in those long afternoon sessions, Ethan began to see something different. Victoria wasn't cold. She was controlled. There was a difference, and it was significant. Cold meant she didn't feel anything. Controlled meant she felt everything and had learned, through years of surviving in rooms where she was always the youngest and usually the only woman, to keep it locked behind a surface that gave nothing away. Ethan recognized the strategy because he used a version of it himself. After Sarah died, he'd built his own walls. Not the polished corporate kind, but the exhausted single-parent kind, where you smiled at pickup and pretended everything was fine because the alternative was falling apart in front of your kid. They were both performing, he realized, just in different arenas. It was during one of those late afternoon sessions, on a Thursday, 3 weeks into the campaign, that the first real crack appeared in Victoria's composure. They were arguing about the hero image for the campaign's print component. Ethan wanted something raw, a close-up of a young woman's wrist with the watch partially hidden under a jacket sleeve, casual and unstaged, like a photo someone's friend took at a restaurant. Victoria wanted something cleaner, more architectural, the watch against a minimalist background that emphasized the design. "You're thinking like a luxury brand," Ethan said, leaning forward in his chair. "That's the whole problem. Every luxury watch ad looks like that. Stark background, dramatic lighting, the watch floating in space like it was sent from another planet. Nobody looks at those ads and feels anything. Nobody looks at a blurry restaurant photo and thinks, I should spend $4,000, either. It's not about the photo being blurry. It's about context. When you see a watch on a real wrist, in a real moment, it becomes part of a life instead of a product on a shelf. That's the emotional gap we need to close." Victoria crossed her arms. "You're romanticizing the consumer. People who buy $4,000 watches aren't looking for authenticity. They're looking for aspiration. And aspiration isn't some guy on a yacht. Not anymore. Aspiration for a 28-year-old is having their life together enough to treat themselves to something beautiful. That's not a fantasy. That's Tuesday night at a decent Italian place." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. She looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan watched something happen behind her eyes. A recalculation, a reassessment. Then she uncrossed her arms and sat back. "You really believe that," she said. "I really do. It's either brilliant or naive, and I genuinely can't tell which. Can it be both?" The smallest smile. Gone almost before it arrived, but real. "Let's test it. Mock up your version and mine. We'll run them through a focus group next week and let the data decide." "You trust the data over your gut?" "I trust my gut over almost everything. But when someone argues as well as you just did, I'm willing to let the numbers have a say." Ethan grinned before he could stop himself. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. Don't get comfortable. He got comfortable anyway. Not in the reckless way. Not in a way that made him forget who she was or what was at stake, but comfortable enough to stop performing, comfortable enough to disagree loudly, to push back without fear, to occasionally make her laugh with a comment she clearly didn't expect. It happened more often than Ethan would have predicted. Victoria had a sense of humor buried under the professional armor. It was dry, precise, and slightly mean in a way Ethan found funnier than he probably should have. During one session, she'd been reviewing a series of tagline options his team had produced. Most were variations on themes of heritage and modern elegance, the kind of safe, committee-approved language that filled advertising like ambient music in an elevator. Victoria read them one by one, her expression growing flatter with each. Where tradition meets tomorrow. The future of timeless. Your moment. Perfected. She set the page down. These sound like they were generated by feeding every watch ad ever made into a blender and hitting puree. They were written by humans, I promise. Then the humans need to try harder. These are the kinds of lines that make people flip the page faster. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, fair. But part of the problem is that the brief keeps using words like timeless and heritage and legacy. When you give a creative team those anchor words, they orbit around them. You want something different, you need to change the vocabulary. So change it. The brief came from your office. Victoria paused. Then she picked up a pen, crossed out 3 paragraphs of brand language on the printed brief, and wrote a single sentence in the margin. She pushed it across the desk. Ethan read it aloud. Make someone feel something they can't name. He looked up at her. That's not a brand direction. That's a dare. Good. Maybe your team needs to be dared. That night, sitting in his car in the Pinnacle parking garage, Ethan texted Marcus. I think my boss might actually be kind of brilliant. Marcus replied immediately. Wasn't she a nightmare 2 weeks ago? People contain multitudes, Marcus. You're quoting poetry now? She's definitely getting to you. Ethan didn't respond to that. He drove home, walked through the front door, and found chaos. Lily was crying at the kitchen table. Margaret was kneeling beside her with a bag of frozen peas pressed against the girl's left forearm. A first aid kit was open on the counter, its contents scattered. Ethan dropped his bag and crossed the room in 3 steps. What happened? She fell off the climbing wall at the park, Margaret said, her voice steady in that particular way that meant she was deeply worried but refusing to show it. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was watching her while I ran to the pharmacy. She says Lily was almost at the top and slipped. Lily looked up at Ethan with tear-streaked cheeks. Her lower lip was trembling. I almost made it, Daddy. I was so close to the top. Ethan knelt beside her and gently moved the frozen peas to look at her arm. The forearm was swollen and beginning to bruise, a dark purple bloom spreading across the skin. Can you move your fingers? He asked. Lily wiggled her fingers, wincing. It hurts. I know, baby. Can you turn your wrist? She tried and yelped. Ethan and Margaret exchanged a look. We should get an X-ray, Margaret said. Ethan nodded. Come on, Lily. We're going to the hospital. I don't want to go to the hospital. I know. But we need to make sure your arm is okay. Can I bring Professor Whiskers? Professor Whiskers can absolutely come. The emergency room at Chicago General was the particular kind of purgatory that single parents know intimately. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a television mounted too high on the wall playing a cooking competition nobody was watching. Ethan held Lily on his lap while they waited, her good arm wrapped around the stuffed otter, her injured arm cradled against her chest. The X-ray came back clean. No fracture, just a bad sprain and some deep bruising. The doctor wrapped Lily's forearm in an elastic bandage and prescribed children's ibuprofen and rest. She'll be sore for a week or 2, the doctor said. Keep it elevated when you can. Ice 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. In the car on the way home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat with Professor Whiskers tucked under her chin. Ethan watched her in the rearview mirror at every red light. The guilt was already settling in, that familiar toxic weight that came with every moment he wasn't there when Lily needed him. He should have been home. He should have been at the park. He should have been the one watching her climb instead of sitting in a corner office debating luxury watch photography with a woman who probably didn't know what a climbing wall looked like. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Campaign focus group is confirmed for next Tuesday. Need your mock-ups by Monday noon. Ethan stared at the message and felt the 2 halves of his life pressing against each other like tectonic plates. He typed back. Got it. My daughter had an accident tonight. Minor, she's okay. But I might need to adjust my schedule this week. The response came faster than he expected. Is she all right? What happened? Fell off a climbing wall. Sprained her forearm. She's sleeping in the car right now holding a stuffed otter. A pause. Then, I'm glad it's nothing serious. Take whatever time you need tomorrow morning. We can push our session to afternoon. Ethan read the message twice. It was a small thing, a scheduling accommodation, nothing more. Any reasonable boss would have said the same. But something about the way she'd asked what happened, the way the question had come before any mention of work logistics, landed differently than he expected. He didn't respond. He carried Lily inside, got her settled in bed, and sat on the edge of her mattress until her breathing went deep and even. Then he went to the kitchen, where Margaret was cleaning up the first aid supplies. She's asleep, he said. Good. Margaret looked at him. And you should sleep too. You look like you haven't had a full night in weeks. I haven't. The campaign, the parenting, the everything. Margaret dried her hands on a dish towel and sat down at the table. Ethan, I need to say something, and you're going to get defensive, but I'm saying it anyway. Great opener, Mom. You're stretching yourself too thin, and before you tell me it's temporary and the campaign will be over in a few weeks, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me you're actually handling this. Ethan wanted to lie. He wanted to say he was fine, that the balance was working, that he had everything under control. But Margaret Parker had been detecting her children's lies since 1986, and there was no upgrade to the operating system that could get past her. I'm not handling it great, he admitted, but I'm handling it. Your daughter fell off a climbing wall because a neighbor was watching her instead of her father. Kids fall, Mom. It would have happened if I was standing right there. Maybe, but you weren't standing right there. You were at the office. The words hit harder than they should have, mostly because Ethan had been thinking the exact same thing for the past 2 hours. I know, he said quietly. I know. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm not trying to make you feel worse. I'm trying to make sure you're making choices you can live with. Your father worked himself into the ground for 20 years, and you know what he said at the end? He said he wished he'd been home more. Don't repeat his mistake. Ethan nodded. He didn't trust his voice to say anything else. That night, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling and did the math he always did. The mortgage, the insurance, the savings account that never grew fast enough, the retirement fund he hadn't contributed to in 2 years, the cost of Lily's school, her activities, her clothes that she outgrew every 4 months like she was doing it on purpose. He needed this job. He needed this campaign to succeed. Not because he wanted a promotion or a corner office, but because the fragile architecture of his family's survival depended on a steady paycheck and decent health insurance. The guilt didn't care about math. It sat on his chest like a stone and didn't move until he finally fell asleep sometime after midnight. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Pinnacle later than usual, around 10. He'd taken Victoria up on her offer to adjust his schedule, dropping Lily at school himself, making sure the bandage was secure, talking to her teacher about the injury. When he walked into Victoria's office that afternoon, she was on the phone. She held up one finger, wait, and continued the call while Ethan settled into his usual chair and opened his notebook. He couldn't help overhearing. Victoria's voice was clipped and professional, but there was an edge to it that he hadn't heard before. Leonard, the quarterly projections were submitted on time and under budget. If you have concerns about the methodology, you can raise them at the next board meeting instead of calling me to question numbers that have already been audited. A pause. Ethan could hear the faint buzz of a voice on the other end, but not the words. I appreciate your perspective. I do not appreciate being called at home on a Sunday evening to discuss it. Goodbye. She hung up and set the phone on her desk with the careful precision of someone resisting the urge to throw it. Leonard Graves? Ethan asked. Leonard Graves? Victoria exhaled slowly through her nose. He called me 3 times this weekend. 3. Once about the quarterly numbers, once about a hiring decision in the finance department, and once to suggest, very diplomatically, that the board might benefit from additional leadership support, which is his way of saying he wants to install someone above me. Can he do that? Not unilaterally. He needs a majority vote. But he's been having quiet dinners with other board members, and he's very good at making reasonable-sounding arguments for unreasonable things. What kind of arguments? Victoria leaned back in her chair. She looked tired. Not the ordinary end-of-day tiredness, but the deeper kind that comes from fighting the same battle over and over with no end in sight. He tells people I'm too aggressive, too focused on growth at the expense of stability. He frames it as concern for the company, but what he really means is that I make decisions without asking his permission first, and that offends him. Because you're young. Because I'm young. Because I'm a woman. And because I was appointed by the previous CEO over Leonard's personal candidate. He's never forgiven that, and he never will. Ethan watched her. In the weeks they'd been working together, he'd seen Victoria Sterling in a dozen different modes: commanding, analytical, impatient, focused, occasionally funny. But this was new. This was raw. She wasn't managing her expression the way she usually did. The fatigue showed in the slight droop of her shoulders, the way she kept pressing her thumb against her temple like she could push the tension out physically. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Since my first week as CEO. 2 years of someone trying to prove you don't belong takes a toll." "Have you told anyone?" Victoria looked at him like the question was absurd. "Who would I tell?" "The board is split. My executive team is competent but cautious. They're not going to pick a fight with a 22-year board member. My COO told me last month that I should try to find common ground with Leonard, which is corporate speak for give him what he wants so he'll stop bothering us." "What about outside the company? Friends? Family?" Something in Victoria's expression shifted. The tiredness was still there, but now there was something else underneath it. A loneliness so practiced and so deeply embedded that she probably didn't even recognize it as loneliness anymore. "My father passed away 4 years ago. He was the one who got me into business. My mother lives in Connecticut and thinks I work too much, which she expresses by sending me articles about meditation retreats and calling every Sunday to ask if I've met anyone nice." She paused. "I have colleagues. I have business contacts. I have people who are invested in my success because it serves their interests. What I don't have is someone I can call at 10 o'clock at night and say, 'I'm exhausted and I don't know if I can keep doing this.'" The honesty of it stunned Ethan, not because Victoria was incapable of vulnerability. He'd suspected for weeks that there was more beneath the surface, but because she was choosing to show it to him, and that choice felt deliberate and significant in a way he couldn't fully articulate. "You can," he said. "Call me at 10, I mean. I'll probably be up arguing with an 8-year-old about bedtime anyway." Victoria looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The afternoon light through the windows was warm and amber, and the silence between them felt different than it had before. Less professional, more human. "How's your daughter?" Victoria asked. "The arm. Sore but fine. She told her entire class she was attacked by a rogue climbing wall, and now she's a hero." "A rogue climbing wall?" "She has a flair for the dramatic. Gets it from her mother." It was the first time Ethan had mentioned Sarah in Victoria's presence. The words came out before he could think about them, natural and unguarded. He waited for the familiar pang, the one that always came when he accidentally talked about Sarah in the present tense, or referenced her without planning to. But today, the pang was softer than usual, more like an echo than a blow. Victoria didn't push. She didn't offer condolences or ask questions about Sarah. She simply nodded, acknowledging the mention without turning it into a moment, and Ethan felt a surge of gratitude for that restraint. "We should get back to work," Victoria said. "Show me what you've got on the mock-ups." They worked through the afternoon, but the quality of their interaction had changed. Something had opened between them. Not dramatically, not romantically, but honestly. They'd shown each other the parts that they normally kept hidden, and the sky hadn't fallen. Over the next several days, the Hartwell campaign began taking shape in ways that surprised even Ethan. His team ran with the dare Victoria had written on that brief: make someone feel something they can't name. And the concepts that came back were unlike anything Pinnacle had produced before. Raw, emotional, grounded. A young architect wearing a Hartwell watch while sketching at a food truck. A woman laughing at a bar with the watch catching light beneath her blazer cuff. A man sitting alone in a beautiful room at 3 a.m., the watch the only elegant thing in a scene of creative chaos. The focus group results came back overwhelmingly positive. Victoria's clean architectural concept tested well with older demographics, But Ethan's approach demolished it with the under 35 market, which was exactly the demographic Hartwell was trying to reach. Victoria studied the numbers in her office, her face unreadable. "Your instinct was right," she said. "I hate admitting that, but the data is the data." "You don't have to hate it." "I don't hate being wrong. I hate not seeing it myself first." She tapped the report. "This is good, Ethan, really good." He noticed she'd stopped calling him Mr. Parker weeks ago, but this was the first time the shift registered consciously. His name sounded different in her voice, weighted with something he was deliberately not examining. Then came the Wednesday that changed things again. Ethan was leaving the office at 6:15, heading to pick up Lily from science club, when his phone rang. It was the school. "Mr. Parker, this is Janet from the front desk at Lakeside Academy. Lily's science club ended 15 minutes ago, but no one has arrived for pickup. Your mother isn't answering her phone." Ethan's stomach tightened. "I'm on my way. I'm 20 minutes out. Can she wait in the office?" "Of course. She's right here." He hung up and immediately called Margaret. No answer. Called again. No answer. The third time, she picked up, sounding groggy. "Mom, are you okay?" "What? Yes, She coughed. "I'm fine, honey. I think I fell asleep on the couch." "What time is it?" "It's 6:20. You were supposed to pick up Lily at 6. "Oh." A long pause. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I had a headache this afternoon, and I lay down for just a minute, and I must have—" "It's okay, Mom. I'm heading there now. Don't worry about it." But he was worried. Margaret didn't nap during the day. Margaret didn't miss pickups. Margaret was the most reliable person in his life, the load-bearing wall that held the entire structure upright. If Margaret started cracking, the whole system was in trouble. He was practically running through the Pinnacle lobby when he nearly collided with Victoria, who was coming out of the elevator with a leather portfolio under one arm and her coat over the other. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Pickup situation. My mom fell asleep and Lily's waiting at school. I need to—" "Which school?" "Lakeside Academy. It's in Lincoln Park, about 20— "I know where it is. My car is in the garage. I can be there in 12 minutes. Ethan stopped walking. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, but you're clearly panicking and I'm going in that direction anyway." She wasn't going in that direction. Ethan knew that. Victoria's apartment was in the Gold Coast, which was the opposite direction from Lincoln Park. She was lying, and she was doing it badly, and somehow that made the gesture more meaningful rather than less. "Victoria, it's not a discussion. Come on." They took her car, a black sedan driven by a man named Carlos, who apparently served as both driver and silent witness to Victoria Sterling's life outside the office. Ethan sat in the back seat next to Victoria, acutely aware of how strange this was. 12 hours ago, they'd been arguing about font choices. Now they were sharing a back seat on an emergency school run. Victoria called the school from the car. "This is Victoria Sterling calling on behalf of Ethan Parker. We're en route to collect his daughter Lily. We'll be there in approximately 10 minutes. She paused. "No, I'm not a family member. I'm his employer. But Mr. Parker is in the vehicle and can confirm." She handed the phone to Ethan. He confirmed, hung up, and looked at Victoria. "You just called yourself my employer." It was the most efficient explanation. "You could have said, friend." Victoria turned to look at him. The evening light through the car window caught her face at an angle that made her look younger than she did in the office, less guarded. "Could I?" The question sat between them, genuine and unprotected. Ethan didn't know how to answer it without saying something that would change the shape of their relationship in ways he wasn't ready for. So he just said, "Yeah, you could." They arrived at Lakeside Academy to find Lily sitting in the front office with her backpack on her lap and Professor Whiskers poking out of the top. She looked small under the harsh office lights, her bandaged arm resting carefully on the backpack. She brightened when she saw Ethan. "Daddy!" Then her eyes moved to the woman standing behind him, and her expression shifted to polite confusion. "Lily, this is Victoria. She works with Daddy, and she gave us a ride." Lily studied Victoria with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only children are brave enough to deploy. "Are you Daddy's boss?" Victoria glanced at Ethan, then back at Lily. "I am." "He says you make him rewrite things a lot." Ethan closed his eyes. Lily. What? You said that. Victoria crouched down to Lily's eye level, which Ethan hadn't expected. In her expensive coat and heels, kneeling on the linoleum floor of an elementary school office, she looked absurdly out of place. But she didn't seem to notice or care. I do make him rewrite things, she told Lily, but only because he's good enough to make them better. Lily considered this. That's what my teacher says when she makes me redo my spelling words. Your teacher sounds smart. Lily held up her bandaged arm. I hurt my arm on a climbing wall. I heard. Does it still hurt? Only when I move it, and sometimes when I don't move it, and when Professor Whiskers bumps it by accident. She pulled the otter out of her backpack and held it up. This is Professor Whiskers. He's an otter. He's very distinguished. He's pretend, but he helps. Victoria smiled. Not the controlled professional smile Ethan had seen in meetings. A real one. It transformed her face in a way that caught him completely off guard, softening the sharp lines, reaching her eyes, making her look like someone you'd want to sit next to at a dinner party instead of someone you'd rehearse presentations for. Pretend things can be very helpful, Victoria said. I used to have a stuffed rabbit named Dr. Carrots. Lily's eyes went wide. Dr. Carrots? He was a very serious rabbit. Did he help you? Every day until I was 10. The fact that Victoria Sterling, the CEO of Pinnacle Media Group, the woman who terrified senior executives and negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking, had once relied on a stuffed rabbit named Dr. Carrots, was the most humanizing piece of information Ethan had ever received about anyone. He stood in the doorway of the school office and felt something shift inside his chest, subtle but tectonic, like a fault line adjusting. They rode back together in the car, Lily chattering about her science club project, a volcano model that was supposed to erupt using baking soda and vinegar, but had instead just kind of leaked, while Victoria listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. The problem is the bottle opening, Lily explained. It's too wide, so the pressure doesn't build up. Mrs. Harrison says I need to make it narrower, but she didn't tell me how. Have you tried a funnel? Victoria said. Lily looked at her with new respect. A funnel? If you invert a small funnel into the bottleneck, it narrows the opening without blocking the flow. The pressure builds up behind the restriction and you get a more dramatic eruption. How do you know that? I was a science fair kid. My baking soda volcano won second place in 4th grade. What won first? A potato battery. I'm still bitter about it. Lily laughed. A real, full laugh that Ethan hadn't heard from her since before the climbing wall incident. It was the sound he lived for, the one that made everything else worth tolerating. Carlos dropped them at Ethan's house. Victoria stayed in the car but rolled down the window as Lily bounded up the porch steps. Thank you, Ethan said, leaning down to the window. For the ride. And for the funnel advice. And for Dr. Carrots. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Their eyes met and the evening air between them felt charged with something neither of them was going to acknowledge out loud. Not yet. Not tonight. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Victoria. He watched the car pull away. When he turned around, Lily was standing in the doorway, watching him with an expression that was far too knowing for an 8-year-old. I like her, Lily said. Go inside and wash your hands for dinner. She's pretty. Lily, hands, dinner, now. But Lily was already bouncing through the door, shouting for Margaret. Grandma, Daddy's boss knows about volcanoes, and she had a rabbit named Dr. Carrots. Margaret appeared in the hallway, looking at Ethan with raised eyebrows. Your boss drove you to school pickup? It's a long story. I bet it is. Ethan didn't elaborate. He helped Lily with dinner, supervised a one-handed teeth brushing that was more comedy than hygiene, and read 2 chapters of a book about a girl detective who solved mysteries using chemistry, Lily's latest obsession. After Lily was asleep, he sat on the couch with his phone in his hand and thought about texting Victoria. Just a simple thank you, a reiteration of gratitude. Professional. Appropriate. Instead, he found himself typing. Lily wants you to know that the funnel idea is genius level. Her words, not mine. Victoria responded 20 minutes later. Tell her I expect full credit when the volcano wins first place. Ethan smiled at his phone in the dark living room. Margaret walked past on her way to bed, paused, looked at the expression on his face, and kept walking without saying a word. Some things didn't need to be said. They just needed to be noticed. The weeks ground forward. The Hartwell pitch date loomed closer. The creative work sharpened, and the strange new dynamic between Ethan and Victoria settled into something that looked professional on the surface but hummed with a frequency only the two of them could hear. They didn't talk about it. They didn't flirt. They didn't do anything that anyone watching would have flagged as inappropriate. But the quality of their attention to each other had changed. The way they held eye contact a beat too long during arguments. The way Ethan noticed when Victoria was having a bad day before she said anything. The way she'd started texting him at night about things that had nothing to do with work. Have you ever noticed that the lake looks different depending on which direction you're driving? Lily's volcano erupted today. She filmed it. Want to see the video? Carlos says hello. He thinks you're a good guy for a creative type. His words, not mine. The texts were harmless. They were also, Ethan knew, the beginning of something that was not harmless at all. Meanwhile, Leonard Graves had not been idle. Ethan first heard Leonard's name spoken in person during a campaign team meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. Rachel Kim, one of Pinnacle's account directors who'd been pulled onto the Hartwell project, mentioned casually that she'd run into Leonard in the lobby that morning. He was asking about the campaign timeline, Miss, Rachel said. Seemed very interested in the budget allocations. Victoria, who was reviewing presentation slides at the head of the table, didn't look up. Leonard is always interested in things that aren't his responsibility. He also asked who was leading the creative. Now Victoria looked up. What did you tell him? The truth. That the creative direction is being handled by the campaign team under your direct oversight. Did he ask about specific people? Rachel hesitated. He asked about Ethan. The room went quiet. Ethan felt the other team members' eyes slide toward him and then away, like they'd all simultaneously decided to study something very interesting on their laptops. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. What did he want to know? Just his role on the project, how much time he's spending on it, whether it's taking him away from his other accounts. And you said? I said I didn't have those details. He seemed, I don't know, curious isn't the right word. Attentive. After the meeting, Victoria asked Ethan to stay. When the conference room cleared, she closed the door and stood with her back against it, arms folded. Leonard is watching us, she said. You think he knows something? I think he's collecting information. That's what he does. He doesn't attack until he has a complete picture, and right now he's building one. She looked at Ethan directly. If he finds any evidence that our working relationship has crossed professional lines, even the suggestion of it, he'll use it to undermine both of us. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. Our working relationship hasn't crossed professional lines. No, it hasn't. They looked at each other across the empty conference room, and the irony of the moment hung in the air like smoke. They were telling the truth. Nothing had happened, but the space between nothing and something had gotten so narrow that you could practically see through it. We need to be careful, Victoria said. I know. I mean it, Ethan. Leonard is not someone who fights fair. If he decides to target you personally, he has the resources and the connections to make your life very difficult. What about your life? My life is already difficult. I'm used to it. That's not the same as being okay with it. Victoria unfolded her arms. Something in her face softened, and for a moment she looked not like a CEO managing a crisis, but like a woman standing in an empty room realizing she was tired of managing everything alone. No, she said quietly. It's not. The moment passed. They returned to their respective offices and their respective roles, and the day continued the way days do. Emails, meetings, phone calls, the ordinary machinery of corporate life churning forward, regardless of what the people inside it were feeling. But that night, alone in his kitchen after Lily and Margaret were both in bed, Ethan sat with a beer he wasn't really drinking and asked himself the question he'd been avoiding for weeks. What was he doing? He was a single father with a kid who depended on him. He was an employee working directly with his CEO on a career-defining project. He was standing at the edge of something that could blow up his professional life and scatter the pieces across his personal one. And the worst part, the part that scared him more than Leonard Graves or career implosion or any of the rational fears his brain was generating, was that he didn't want to stop. He didn't want to go back to the version of his life where he clocked in and clocked out and felt nothing. He didn't want to lose the late afternoon sessions and the honest arguments and the texts at 10 p.m. about how the lake looked different from different directions. He wanted Victoria, not just professionally, not just as a collaborator or a boss or a friend. He wanted the woman who knelt on a school office floor to talk to his daughter about stuffed rabbits. He wanted the woman who got mustard on her thumb and pretended she didn't. He wanted the woman who fought a quiet war every single day and never let anyone see her bleed, and that wanting was going to be a problem. Ethan finished his beer, rinsed the bottle, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, there would be a campaign to finish and a daughter to raise and 100 practical reasons to keep his feelings locked behind professional walls. Tonight, though, the walls felt thinner than they'd ever been. The walls held for exactly 11 more days. Ethan knew the exact count because he'd started marking time differently, not by calendar dates or campaign milestones, but by the accumulation of moments he couldn't explain away as professional. The way Victoria's hand brushed his when they both reached for the same printed mock-up. The way she said his name at the end of long sessions, softer than she said anything else. The way he caught himself thinking about her at odd hours. Not about work, not about the campaign, but about the way she looked when she laughed and didn't catch it in time, when the real version of her face broke through the controlled one for just a second. 11 days of pretending that what was happening between them wasn't happening. On the 12th day, they broke. It was late. Nearly 8 on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks before the Hartwell pitch. The rest of the campaign team had gone home hours ago. Ethan and Victoria were alone in her office, surrounded by spread-out storyboards and printed ad concepts and the remains of Thai food that Diane had ordered before leaving. They'd been arguing about the final sequence of the pitch presentation. Ethan wanted to end with the emotional campaign video, a 60-second spot he'd storyboarded himself, set to a solo piano track, showing fragments of real life with Hartwell watches woven through them. Victoria wanted to end with the numbers, projected ROI, market penetration forecasts, the hard financial case that would appeal to Hartwell's data-driven board. "You can't end a pitch with a spreadsheet," Ethan said. "Not after you've just made the room feel something. That's like playing a love song and then reading the electric bill. And you can't end a pitch without financials. These people aren't buying a feeling. They're buying results. They're buying both. The feeling is what gets them to say yes. The numbers are what they use to justify it afterward." Victoria shook her head. "You're a romantic, Ethan. In business, that's a liability. And you're a pragmatist. In advertising, that's a limitation." "Did you just call me limited?" "I called your approach limited. There's a difference. A very small one." They were standing on opposite sides of the conference table, leaning toward each other across a landscape of paper and food containers. The argument had the familiar energy of their working dynamic, sharp, honest, slightly combative. But tonight it was running hotter than usual. Every exchange felt charged, like static building before a storm. "Fine," Victoria said. "Propose a compromise. You're the creative. Create one. We do the video, then the numbers, then we loop back to one final image from the campaign. No words, no data. Just the image. Let the room sit with it. That's 3 endings. It's one ending in 3 movements, like music. You keep comparing advertising to music because it works the same way. You set up an expectation, you deliver on it, and then you surprise them at the end. That's what makes people remember." Victoria stared at him. The office was quiet. No hum of the ventilation system, no distant phone ringing, no ambient sounds of a building full of people. Just the two of them and the silence and the city lights through the windows. "You really care about this," she said. Her voice had lost the argumentative edge. What was left underneath sounded almost confused, like she'd stumbled onto something she hadn't expected to find. "Of course I care about this. I don't mean the campaign. I mean..." She gestured vaguely at the storyboards, the presentation, the scattered debris of weeks of intense collaboration. "All of this. You fight for things. You push back when you think I'm wrong. You don't just agree with me to keep your job safe." I thought that's why you hired me. Because I'm honest. I didn't hire you. You accidentally insulted me via text message and I exploited the situation. Ethan laughed. It came out louder than he intended in the empty office, surprising both of them. There it is, Victoria said quietly. There what is? That. Whatever that is. She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen from her before, open and uncertain and slightly afraid. I've been trying to figure out what's different about working with you. Why I look forward to these sessions when I've never looked forward to anything at this company except results. And I think it's because you make me feel like I'm not performing. Like I can just be the version of myself that isn't managing something. Ethan's heart was hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with Thai food or caffeine. Victoria, I know what you're going to say. We're colleagues. This is complicated. There are professional boundaries and Leonard Graves and 100 practical reasons why this conversation shouldn't be happening. That's not what I was going to say. Then what? Ethan set down the presentation notes he'd been holding. He walked around the conference table until he was standing in front of her, close enough to see the faint shadows under her eyes and the way her pulse was visible at her throat. I was going to say that I haven't felt this way about anyone since my wife died, and it terrifies me. Not because of the professional complications or Leonard or any of the rational stuff. It terrifies me because I forgot what it was like to want to be around someone, to think about someone at midnight and first thing in the morning. I forgot that could happen, and now it's happening, and I don't know what to do with it. Victoria didn't move. She stood completely still, the way she did in board meetings when she was processing a critical piece of information. But her eyes were bright and her hands were shaking slightly at her sides, and Ethan realized he'd never seen Victoria Sterling shake before. I don't either, she said. The distance between them closed. Later, Ethan wouldn't be able to say who moved first, whether he reached for her or she stepped toward him, or if it was mutual, gravitational, the inevitable result of weeks of proximity and honesty and two lonely people finally admitting what they'd been circling. The kiss was clumsy and imperfect, their noses bumping before they found the right angle, and Victoria tasted like green tea and the lime from her pad thai, and Ethan's hands were trembling when they found her waist. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then Victoria pulled back, put her hand on his chest, and took a breath. Okay, she said. That happened. Yeah. And we can't pretend it didn't. No, we can't. Victoria walked to the windows and stood there with her back to him, arms wrapped around herself. When she turned around, the vulnerable woman from 30 seconds ago was already being overwritten by the strategist. Leonard is going to find out, she said. Not about tonight specifically, but about us, whatever this is. He's been watching, and people like Leonard always eventually see what they're looking for. So what do? We get ahead of it. We disclose voluntarily. Ethan blinked. Disclose? To HR. To HR. Before anyone else can frame the narrative. If Leonard finds out and goes to the board, it becomes a scandal. If we go to HR ourselves, it becomes a policy matter handled through proper channels. That's incredibly cold-blooded for someone who just kissed me. It's not cold-blooded, it's survival. I know how these things work, Ethan. A CEO in a relationship with a direct report is a loaded weapon in the wrong hands. The only way to disarm it is transparency. Ethan sat down on the edge of the conference table. His mind was racing in 4 directions simultaneously. The professional implications, the personal enormity of what had just happened, the fear of exposure, and underneath all of it, a stubborn, irrational happiness that refused to shut up. So we tell HR we're, what? Dating? We tell HR that a personal relationship has developed between us during the course of this project, that we're choosing to disclose it voluntarily, and that we're requesting guidance on appropriate structural changes to avoid conflicts of interest. You've thought about this before. Victoria looked at him steadily. I've thought about this every day for the past 3 weeks. Did you think tonight was spontaneous? I was kind of hoping it was. Nothing in my life is spontaneous. I wanted to kiss you after the school pickup when you stood at my car window and told me it wasn't nothing. I've been trying to talk myself out of it ever since. Obviously, I failed. There was something so perfectly Victoria about that confession. The precision, the self-awareness, the dry admission of failure. That Ethan felt a wave of affection so strong it almost knocked him sideways. "For the record," he said, "I've been failing at the same thing." "Good. Then we're failing together. First thing Monday, we go to HR." "Together?" "Together." Ethan drove home that night with the windows down, the May air warm and smelling like lake water and cut grass, and his entire nervous system humming at a frequency it hadn't reached in years. He was happy. Genuinely, recklessly, irresponsibly happy. He was also terrified. The two feelings coexisted in his chest like weather systems colliding, and he had no idea which one would win. Margaret was asleep when he got home. Lily was asleep. The house was dark and quiet, and Ethan stood in the kitchen drinking a glass of water and thinking about how strange it was that your life could crack open on a Thursday evening with no warning, that you could walk into an office as one kind of person and walk out as another. His phone buzzed. "Victoria." "I don't regret it," he typed back. "Neither do I." "Monday, HR, 9 a.m. I'll schedule it." "Okay." A pause. Then, "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Victoria." He stood in the dark kitchen smiling at his phone like a teenager, which was ridiculous for a 32-year-old man with a mortgage and a kid and what was about to become the most complicated professional situation of his career. He didn't care. He smiled anyway. The weekend was a strange, suspended interval. Ethan took Lily to the park on Saturday morning, pushed her on the swings. She declared her arm 90% healed and ready for action, and sat on a bench watching her climb the smaller play structure with the cautious confidence of a kid who'd recently learned that gravity was not always her friend. Margaret settled beside him with 2 paper cups of coffee from the cart near the entrance. "You're different," she said. "Different how?" "You're smiling for no reason. You were whistling this morning. You never whistle." "Maybe I'm in a good mood." "You're never in a good mood on Saturday mornings. Saturday mornings are when you worry about the week ahead." She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Is it the boss?" Ethan considered lying. He considered deflecting, changing the subject, making a joke. But Margaret would see through all of it, and the effort of pretending was suddenly more exhausting than the truth. "Yeah," he said, "it's the boss." Margaret nodded slowly, like she was confirming something she'd already known. "Are you being careful?" "We're going to HR on Monday, disclosing everything voluntarily." "That's professional careful. I'm asking about the other kind." Ethan looked at Lily, who was hanging upside down from a bar with her hair swinging and her face red with the particular joy of defying the ordinary laws of physics. "I don't know, Mom. I haven't done this in a long time. The last person I—" He stopped. The words got stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. Margaret put her hand on his knee. "Sarah would want you to be happy. You know that." "I know. But it's complicated. Victoria is my boss. There are people at the company who want to destroy her career, and I have Lily, and Lily's already getting attached, and if it falls apart, you'll handle it. The same way you handled everything else. But you don't build your life around the assumption that things will fall apart, Ethan. That's not living. That's just organized hiding." Organized hiding. Trust Margaret Parker, retired English teacher, to nail his entire emotional strategy in 2 words. Monday morning arrived with the relentless punctuality of Mondays everywhere. Ethan dressed more carefully than usual, which he told himself was because of the HR meeting and not because he was going to see Victoria. He put on a blue Oxford shirt that Sarah had once told him made his eyes look serious, and then spent 45 seconds wondering if it was weird to wear a shirt chosen by his dead wife to a meeting about his new relationship. It was definitely weird. He wore it anyway. Victoria was waiting outside the HR department when he arrived. She was wearing a dark navy dress that he hadn't seen before, her hair down instead of pulled back, and for a disorienting moment, Ethan saw her not as his CEO or his collaborator, but simply as a woman he wanted to be near. "Ready?" she asked. "No." "Good. Me neither. Let's go." The HR director was a woman named Sandra Whitfield, mid-50s, with a calm, measured demeanor that suggested she'd seen every possible configuration of workplace relationship drama and was surprised by none of it. Victoria did most of the talking. She explained the situation with the same precision she brought to board presentations. The timeline, the nature of the relationship, the voluntary disclosure, the request for guidance on structural adjustments. Sandra listened, took notes, and asked 3 questions. Was the relationship consensual? Were there any complaints from either party about pressure or coercion? Was there a direct reporting line between them? Yes, consensual, no complaints. And yes, technically there was a reporting line. Ethan reported to his department head, who reported to the COO, who reported to Victoria. The chain was indirect, but the current project had placed Ethan in a direct working relationship with the CEO. Sandra nodded. I appreciate the voluntary disclosure. This is exactly how these situations should be handled. I'll need to draft a relationship disclosure agreement for both of you to sign, and we'll need to discuss potential structural changes to address the reporting concern. What kind of changes? Ethan asked. The simplest option would be to reassign the direct project oversight from Ms. Sterling to another senior executive. You'd continue on the Hartwell campaign, but with a different supervisor. That won't work, Victoria said. I've been personally leading this campaign. Reassigning oversight 2 weeks before the pitch would be disruptive and would raise questions we're not ready to answer publicly. Or then we can implement a delayed restructure. You complete the current project under the existing arrangement, and any future assignments involving both of you will go through an intermediary. In the meantime, I'll document the voluntary disclosure and file it with the appropriate records. They signed the paperwork. It took 20 minutes. When they walked out of Sandra's office, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability, like taking off a bulletproof vest and realizing you're now lighter but also completely exposed. That was anticlimactic, he said. That's what good HR looks like. Clean, boring, and procedural. You sound like you've done this before. I haven't, but I've seen what happens when people don't go to HR, and it's always ugly. Victoria stopped walking in the hallway and turned to face him. This is the right thing, Ethan. Whatever happens next, we did this the right way. I know. She reached out and adjusted the collar of his shirt, a small, intimate gesture that felt enormous in the fluorescent-lit corporate hallway. Blue looks good on you, she said. Then she turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Ethan standing in the hall with a straightened collar and the dizzying realization that his life was now officially, irreversibly complicated. What neither of them knew was that Sandra Whitfield's office shared a wall with a conference room that Leonard Graves had booked for a 10 o'clock meeting. And Leonard, who made a habit of arriving early to everything, had been sitting alone in that conference room for the past 20 minutes with the connecting door slightly ajar. He hadn't heard everything, but he'd heard enough. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later on Thursday afternoon when Ethan received an email from Pinnacle's legal department requesting a brief informational meeting regarding campaign documentation protocols. It was phrased innocuously enough, the kind of bureaucratic nothingness that fills corporate inboxes every day. But the timing made Ethan's skin prickle. He showed the email to Victoria. This isn't about documentation, she said, reading it on his phone. This is about information gathering. Legal doesn't request meetings with mid-level creatives about protocols. Someone asked them to. Leonard? Leonard doesn't use legal directly. He's smarter than that. He uses proxies. Victoria set down the phone. Go to the meeting. Answer everything honestly. Don't volunteer information they didn't ask for, but don't lie. Wasn't planning on it. I know. That's why I trust you. The legal meeting was, on the surface, exactly what it claimed to be. A 30-minute conversation about campaign asset management, intellectual property guidelines, and documentation standards for client presentations. But threaded through the routine questions were probes that felt pointed. How often did Ethan meet with Victoria directly? Were those meetings documented? Who else attended? Were there meetings that occurred outside regular business hours? Ethan answered truthfully. Yes, he met with Victoria directly. They were collaborating on the biggest campaign in the company's recent history. Yes, some meetings occurred in the evening. Campaign deadlines didn't respect 9-to-5 schedules. Yes, other team members were usually present, though not always. The lawyer, a pale, meticulously groomed man named David something, took notes and thanked Ethan for his time. Nothing about the conversation was overtly threatening, but Ethan left the meeting with the unmistakable feeling of having been measured for something. That night, he told Victoria about it over the phone. They'd started calling each other in the evenings. Not texting, but actual phone calls. The kind where you could hear each other breathe and laugh and sigh. The calls usually lasted an hour, sometimes longer, occupying the quiet window between Lily's bedtime and Ethan's. "David Chen," Victoria said. "He's in corporate compliance. He doesn't usually handle documentation reviews." "So, someone moved him onto this?" "Someone wanted a compliance attorney in the room instead of a regular legal associate. That's a specific choice." "Are you worried?" A pause. "I'm not worried about the HR disclosure. We did everything right. What I'm worried about is Leonard spinning it. He's not going to challenge the disclosure itself. That would look petty. He's going to try to frame the relationship as evidence of broader leadership problems, judgment, priorities, professionalism. Can he do that? He can do anything if he controls the narrative. And Leonard has had 22 years to learn exactly how to control narratives at this company." Ethan lay on his bed in the dark, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the distant sound of traffic through Victoria's windows. He wanted to be there with her, in her apartment, close enough to touch. The wanting was a constant now, a low hum beneath every conversation and every moment. "I'm not going to let him hurt you," Ethan said. "That's sweet, but I'm not being sweet. I'm being practical. If Leonard wants to fight, he's going to have to fight both of us." Another pause, then very quietly, "I'm not used to having backup." "I know. Get used to it." He heard her exhale. Not a sigh exactly, more like the release of a tension she'd been carrying so long it had become part of her posture. "Tell me something about Lily. Something that has nothing to do with business or boards or legal departments." Ethan smiled in the dark. "She's building a new volcano, a bigger one. She says the first one was a prototype, and this one is the production model. She used your funnel idea, and she made me buy 3 bottles of vinegar at the grocery store. The cashier looked at me like I was planning something illegal." Victoria laughed. The real laugh, the one she couldn't control. "She also asked about you twice." "What did she ask?" "First she asked if you were coming over for dinner. Then she asked if you had any other science tricks. She thinks you're a secret scientist." "I'm flattered. What did you tell her?" "I told her you were very busy, and she said, 'Daddy, busy people still eat dinner.'" "She's not wrong." "She's 8. She's never wrong. She'll tell you that herself." They talked for another 40 minutes about nothing important. Favorite movies, worst meals, cities they'd visited, places they hadn't. It was the kind of conversation that builds the architecture of intimacy, one small brick at a time. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just 2 people learning the ordinary geography of each other's lives. After they hung up, Ethan lay awake thinking about what Victoria had said. "I'm not used to having backup." The loneliness in that sentence was staggering. Not the temporary kind that comes from a bad week, but the structural kind that comes from years of being the person everyone depends on and no one supports. He'd felt that loneliness himself in the years after Sarah. The crushing weight of being the only adult in the house, the only decision maker, the only one who stayed up worrying about the bills and the future, and whether Lily was getting enough vegetables and enough affection, and enough of whatever it was that children needed to grow up without holes in them. Margaret helped. Marcus helped. But at the end of every day, Ethan was alone with the weight, and he'd grown so accustomed to carrying it that he'd forgotten it was heavy. Victoria carried her own weight. Different in shape, identical in mass, and for the first time, they were both considering the possibility that carrying it together might be something other than weakness. The campaign entered its final phase. 2 weeks until the Hartwell pitch. Ethan's team was working around the clock, refining creative assets, producing the campaign video, polishing the presentation until every slide was sharp enough to cut glass. Victoria was managing the business side, financial projections, partnership terms, media buying strategies, while simultaneously handling her regular CEO responsibilities, which included 3 board calls, 2 investor meetings, and Leonard Graves sending her increasingly pointed emails about transparency and executive decision-making. It was during one of those crushing late nights, 9 days before the pitch, the office mostly empty, Ethan hunched over his desk in the creative department reviewing final edits to the campaign video, that he found something he wasn't supposed to find. The video production team had been working from a shared server where all Hartwell campaign assets were stored. Ethan was digging through folders looking for the final color-graded version of a particular shot when he stumbled into a directory he hadn't seen before. It was nested deep inside the server's file structure, buried under 3 layers of innocuously labeled folders: archive, then legacy files, then board reference materials. The folder contained emails, dozens of them, correspondence between Leonard Graves and executives at 2 of Pinnacle's direct competitors, Meridian Agency and Crestline Partners. Ethan almost closed the folder. It was clearly not campaign-related, and he had no business reading someone else's correspondence. But one of the subject lines caught his eye. Hartwell Strategic Framework, Confidential. He opened it. The email was from Leonard to a man named Douglas Fink at Meridian Agency. It was dated 3 months earlier, weeks before the Hartwell campaign had even begun its current iteration. The message was short and devastating. Leonard had attached a summary of Pinnacle's internal strategy for the Hartwell pitch, not the creative approach, which hadn't been developed yet, but the business framework, client relationship mapping, pricing strategy, market analysis, internal assessments of Pinnacle's competitive weaknesses. Douglas Fink's reply was equally concise. "This is extremely helpful. We'll adjust our approach accordingly." The usual arrangement? Leonard's response: "Same as always. I'll send the updated competitive analysis next month." Ethan sat very still in his desk chair. The glow of the monitor was the only light in the empty office, and the silence around him felt suddenly enormous and hostile. He scrolled through more emails. The correspondence stretched back over 2 years. Leonard had been systematically feeding confidential company information to Pinnacle's competitors: campaign strategies, client lists, internal financial data, personnel decisions. Not everything, and not consistently. Just enough to give Meridian and Crestline a reliable edge in competitive pitches. Just enough to ensure that Pinnacle lost key accounts at critical moments. And every time Pinnacle lost an account, Leonard had used the failure to question Victoria's leadership at board meetings. The elegance of it was sickening. Leonard wasn't just trying to remove Victoria. He was actively sabotaging the company to create the evidence he needed to justify removing her. Every lost pitch, every missed target, every disappointing quarter, it all fed back into his argument that the company needed different leadership. And nobody knew, because nobody was looking at the 22-year board veteran as the source of the problem. Ethan's hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. A deep, quiet, structural anger that started somewhere in his gut and spread outward until his whole body felt charged with it. He pulled out his phone and called Victoria. "Ethan, it's almost 11. Are you still at the office? I need you to come here right now." "What happened?" "I found something on the campaign server. Something about Leonard." Silence on the line, then, "I'm on my way." Victoria arrived 25 minutes later in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose, no makeup. It was the most unguarded Ethan had ever seen her, and under different circumstances, he might have taken a moment to appreciate it. But the circumstances were what they were. He showed her the emails. He watched her read them, one by one, her face cycling through expressions he'd never seen from her. Shock, then disbelief, then a cold, crystallizing fury that made the air in the room feel 10 degrees colder. When she finished reading, she stood very still for a long time. 2 years, she said. He's been doing this for 2 years. At least. Every pitch we lost, the Belmont account, the Skyward campaign, the Drift Media partnership that fell through at the last minute. She pressed her palms against the desk, leaning forward like she needed something solid to hold on to. He was feeding them our playbook, and then he'd walk into board meetings and tell everyone I was losing clients because I wasn't experienced enough. Victoria, I defended myself in those meetings, every time. I sat there and took responsibility for losses that weren't my fault because I thought. Her voice cracked. Just slightly, just for a moment. Then she pulled it back together with a visible effort that made Ethan's chest ache. I thought I was failing. For 2 years, I actually believed I was failing, and it was him. It was him the entire time. Ethan wanted to touch her. He wanted to put his arms around her and hold her until the shaking stopped. But he could see that Victoria needed to be angry right now. She needed the fury more than she needed comfort, because the fury was what was going to get them through what came next. We need copies of everything, she said. Screenshots, timestamps, The full chain of correspondence. Already done. I forwarded it all to my personal email and took screenshots of the file path. Victoria looked at him. You did that before you called me? I've watched enough movies to know that evidence disappears when people start asking questions. Smart. Terrified, but also smart. We can't use this yet. If we go public now, Leonard will claim the files were planted. He'll say I fabricated evidence to deflect from the HR situation. We need to verify the authenticity through a third party, preferably the company's external legal counsel, not the internal team. Oh, you think the internal team is compromised? I think Leonard has had 22 years to build relationships with everyone in this building. I'm not trusting anyone I don't have to. She straightened up and looked at him. In the dim light of the empty office, she looked both exhausted and electric, like someone who'd been fighting with one hand tied behind her back and had just realized the other hand was free. Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. If we do this, if we go after Leonard, it won't be quiet. He'll fight back. He'll go after you personally, your job, your reputation, your relationship with me. He'll use everything he has. I know. And you have Lily. You have a family that depends on you. I know that too. So I'm asking, are you sure? Ethan looked at the woman standing in front of him, tired and angry and brave and imperfect, and asking him, in the only way she knew how, if he was going to stay. Victoria, 3 months ago, I was a mid-level creative director who accidentally texted his boss something stupid. Now I'm standing in a dark office at 11:30 at night, looking at evidence of corporate espionage with the woman I'm falling in love with. Nothing about this is what I planned, but I'm not walking away. Victoria's eyes glistened in the monitor light. She blinked hard, once, and it was gone. Okay, she said. Then we fight. They spent the next 2 hours creating a detailed record of everything Ethan had found. Email chains, file locations, dates, names. The pattern of information leaks correlated with lost accounts. Victoria called her personal attorney at midnight, apologized for the hour, and arranged a meeting for Friday morning. When they finally left the building, it was nearly 2 a.m. The street was empty, the city reduced to distant traffic sounds, and the amber glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. A spring rain had come and gone while they were inside, leaving everything slick and gleaming. They stood on the sidewalk outside Pinnacle, and the absurdity of the moment settled over them like a fog. Two people in the middle of the night, holding evidence that could topple a powerful man, standing in the rain-washed aftermath of a Thursday that had turned their world inside out. You should go home, Victoria said. Lily's going to wonder why you look like you didn't sleep. I'll tell her I was fighting bad guys. She'll love it. Victoria smiled. It was tired and thin and completely genuine. You kind of were. He took her hand. She let him. They stood there for a moment, connected by their interlocked fingers and the weight of what they'd just uncovered and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that they were in this together. Monday, Victoria said. After the external counsel reviews everything, we request an emergency board meeting. And the Hartwell pitch is next Wednesday. We do both. We pitch the campaign, and we take down Leonard in the same week. That's insane. That's the only option. If we wait, he'll find out we know. And if he finds out we know, the evidence disappears and so do our careers. Ethan squeezed her hand. Then I guess it's going to be a busy week. Victoria squeezed back. Get some sleep, Ethan. You too. I don't sleep. I strategize horizontally with my eyes closed. He laughed and she laughed, and the sound of it echoed off the wet buildings and disappeared into the vast, indifferent Chicago night. Then they separated. Victoria into her waiting car, Ethan to his Honda in the parking garage, and drove in opposite directions through a city that had no idea what was coming. Ethan got home at 2:30. The house was dark. He checked on Lily, who was sleeping with Professor Whiskers, and a new addition, a hand-drawn diagram of her improved volcano taped to the wall above her bed. In the diagram, the eruption was enormous, filling half the page with orange and red crayon explosions. In the corner, in Lily's careful handwriting, was a note, dedicated to Victoria, secret scientist. Ethan stood in the doorway of his daughter's room, looking at the drawing, and felt the full complexity of his life settle over him like weather. The fear, the anger, the love. For Lily, for Victoria, for the messy, impossible, beautiful thing they were all building together, whether they'd planned it or not. He closed Lily's door gently, walked to his own room, and lay down on the bed without undressing. Sleep came fast and hard, pulling him under before he could worry about Monday or Leonard or the campaign or any of the 100 things that were hurtling toward him at the speed of consequence. For now there was only the dark and the quiet and the sound of his daughter breathing down the hall. For now, that was enough. The external counsel confirmed the authenticity of the emails on Friday afternoon. Victoria's personal attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Helen Carver, who'd spent 20 years litigating corporate fraud cases, reviewed the metadata, cross-referenced the timestamps with server access logs, and delivered her assessment in 3 sentences. The correspondence is genuine. The server logs show access from Leonard Graves' corporate login credentials at times consistent with the email timestamps. You have enough here to trigger a formal investigation, and in my professional opinion, enough for immediate removal proceedings under the company's bylaws. Victoria sat in Helen's downtown office with her hands folded on the table, perfectly still, absorbing the confirmation of what she already knew. Ethan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, watching Victoria process the information with the controlled intensity of someone diffusing an explosive. "What's our timeline?" Victoria asked. "If you want to move before Graves has any indication you found this, you need to act within days, not weeks. The longer you wait, the higher the risk that he discovers the files have been accessed and begins covering his tracks. We have the Hartwell pitch on Wednesday." Helen raised an eyebrow. "You're pitching a major campaign in the middle of this?" "We're pitching a major campaign because of this. Every account we've lost in the past 2 years was undermined by Leonard. Hartwell is the first campaign he hasn't been able to sabotage because I've been managing it directly. If we land this client, it proves the company's failures weren't about my leadership. They were about his betrayal." Helen looked at Victoria for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan, then back at Victoria. "You're going to do both in the same week. We don't have a choice. You always have a choice. This particular choice happens to be the most aggressive and high-risk option available. It's also the only one that works. If we go after Leonard before the pitch, he'll find a way to tank the presentation from the outside. If we wait until after, he'll have time to destroy evidence. The pitch and the board meeting need to happen in the same window." Helen leaned back and tapped her pen against the legal pad. "Okay, here's what I recommend. You request an emergency board meeting for Thursday, the day after the pitch. Frame it as a governance matter. Don't tip the subject. Leonard will assume it's about the HR disclosure, which works in your favor because he'll prepare for the wrong fight. And at the meeting, you present the evidence. All of it. Emails, server logs, the pattern of leaked information correlated with lost accounts. I'll be present as outside counsel. If the board votes to investigate, Leonard gets suspended pending the outcome. If they vote to remove, he's done." Victoria nodded. "Draft the board meeting request. I'll sign it tonight." They left Helen's office and stood on the sidewalk in the late afternoon sun. The city moved around them. Taxis, pedestrians, the distant clatter of the L. And Ethan felt the surreal disconnect of standing in the middle of ordinary life while carrying something extraordinary inside him. "You okay?" he asked. Victoria pulled her sunglasses out of her bag and put them on. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You just found out someone's been sabotaging your career for 2 years. You're allowed to not be fine." She started walking toward the parking garage, and Ethan fell into step beside her. "When my father was teaching me about business," Victoria said, "he used to say that the most dangerous people in any organization aren't the ones who disagree with you. They're the ones who smile at you while moving the ground under your feet." She stopped walking. "I've been looking for the people who disagreed with me. I never thought to look at the ones who were smiling." "Leonard smiles a lot?" "Leonard smiles constantly. He smiled at me in my first board meeting and told me he was thrilled to support fresh leadership. He smiled when he questioned my quarterly numbers. He smiled when he suggested the company needed additional executive oversight." Her jaw tightened. "He was smiling the entire time he was feeding our strategy to our competitors. He won't be smiling Thursday. No, he won't." The weekend was a pressure cooker. Ethan spent Saturday and Sunday doing 2 things simultaneously: finalizing every detail of the Hartwell pitch presentation and helping Victoria's legal team organize the evidence against Leonard into a clear chronological narrative that even the most skeptical board member couldn't dismiss. Margaret noticed the intensity. She'd been noticing everything lately. Ethan's late nights, his distracted mornings, the way he checked his phone with an urgency that went beyond normal work anxiety. On Sunday afternoon, while Lily was in the backyard conducting what she called volcanic field tests, pouring vinegar into increasingly ambitious baking soda constructions, Margaret cornered Ethan in the kitchen. "Something's happening," she said. "Something bigger than the campaign." Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her, but the legal implications made him cautious. The fewer people who knew about the Leonard situation before Thursday, the better. "There's a problem at work," he said carefully. "Someone's been doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and Victoria and I found out about it. We're handling it, but this week is going to be intense." Margaret studied him with the penetrating gaze of a woman who'd spent 3 decades reading between the lines of teenagers' excuses. "Is it dangerous?" "Not physically. Professionally, maybe." "For you or for her?" "Both." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll handle everything here. Lily's school, her meals, her pickups. You do what you need to do this week, but Ethan..." She waited until he looked at her. "Come home. Whatever happens, come home at the end of it." "I will, Mom." "And bring her with you sometime." "Victoria, Lily's been asking." Ethan blinked. "Lily's been asking about Victoria?" "She made a card. It's on her desk. It says, 'Dear Victoria, thank you for the funnel idea. My volcano is much better now. Also, I think your name is pretty.'" She drew a picture of an otter wearing a lab coat. Something cracked open in Ethan's chest, a warm, destabilizing tenderness that made his throat tight and his eyes sting. "I'll bring her over," he said, "after this week." "Good. Now go finish whatever you're doing. I'll supervise the volcanic field tests." Monday arrived. The Pinnacle offices hummed with the electric tension of a major pitch week. The creative team was in overdrive, designers making last-minute adjustments to visual assets, copywriters polishing presentation scripts, the production team doing final color correction on the campaign video. Ethan moved through it all with a focus that surprised even himself. The 2 parallel operations, the pitch and the takedown, required different parts of his brain, and switching between them gave him a strange, almost manic energy. He'd spend an hour reviewing presentation flow with his team, then step into a quiet conference room to take a call from Helen Carver about evidence organization, then go back to creative review without missing a beat. Victoria was doing the same thing, but at a higher altitude. She had a board meeting request to finalize, investor calls to handle, regular CEO business to maintain, and the Hartwell pitch to oversee, all while keeping Leonard completely in the dark about what was coming. The performance required was extraordinary. She had to interact with Leonard normally, respond to his emails, participate in board calls where he was present, and show nothing. Ethan saw the toll it was taking. In their private moments, stolen minutes between meetings, quick calls during lunch breaks, he could see the strain around her eyes, the tightness in her shoulders, the effort it took to maintain the mask. "How are you doing this?" he asked her on Monday evening during a brief phone call while he sat in his car in the Pinnacle parking garage. "How are you sitting across from him in meetings knowing what you know?" "Practice," Victoria said. "I've been performing composure in hostile rooms since I was 26. Leonard just gave me a better reason to do it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now. I'll fall apart later. After." "Promise?" "What?" "Promise me you'll fall apart later. Not permanently. Just let it out. You've been holding everything in for 2 years, and it's going to eat you alive if you don't." A long pause. "Is this what you do? Just say things that are true and expect people to deal with it?" "Pretty much. Is it working?" "Annoyingly, yes." Tuesday was a blur, final rehearsal for the Hartwell pitch. Ethan ran through the entire presentation 3 times with his team, tweaking transitions, adjusting timing, making sure the emotional arc of the campaign video landed with maximum impact. Victoria attended the final rehearsal and gave notes. Sharp, specific, constructive. And if anyone on the team noticed the current running between her and Ethan, they didn't mention it. That evening, Ethan picked up Lily from school himself. She came running out of the building with her backpack bouncing and a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "Daddy, look! Mrs. Harrison gave me an A on my volcano report." Ethan took the paper. The report was 3 pages long, handwritten in Lily's careful script, with diagrams and a bibliography that included 2 actual books and a YouTube video about pyroclastic flow. At the top, Mrs. Harrison had written, "Excellent work, Lily. The funnel modification was very creative. A+. "An A+?" Ethan said. "Not just an A." "I know. Plus means extra, like extra good." "I'm proud of you, kid. Can I tell Victoria? She helped with the funnel part." Ethan looked at his daughter, standing in the afternoon sunlight with her report clutched to her chest and her eyes bright with the particular pride of a child who has accomplished something real. Lily didn't have complicated feelings about Victoria. She didn't agonize over professional boundaries or power dynamics or the implications of a CEO dating a single father. She just knew that a woman had been kind to her, had helped with her volcano, had knelt on a school office floor, and talked about a stuffed rabbit named Dr. Carrots. In Lily's world, that was enough. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You can tell her." He took a photo of the report and texted it to Victoria with Lily's message. "Victoria, I got an A+ on my volcano. The funnel worked. Thank you. Lily." Daddy is typing this, but the words are mine. Victoria's response came 10 minutes later. "Tell Lily I'm incredibly proud of her. And tell her Dr. Carrots would be proud too. Also tell her I still think that potato battery was overrated." Lily insisted on hearing every word of the reply, then demanded that Ethan text back her response. "I agree about the potato battery. It was basic. Volcanoes are better because they explode." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the volcano diagram on the wall, the card for Victoria on the desk, the stack of library books, and the hand-drawn insect guide, and the small, messy, beautiful evidence of a child's expanding world. Victoria was becoming part of that world. Not in a dramatic way, not through grand gestures or formal introductions, but through small moments of genuine connection, a funnel idea, a stuffed rabbit story, a text about potato batteries. The kind of moments that don't look like much from the outside but feel like everything from the inside. He touched the corner of the card on Lily's desk. The otter in the lab coat was lopsided, and its whiskers were too long, but it was clearly drawn with care. This was what he was fighting for, not just the campaign, not just Victoria's career or his own. This, the card, the volcano, the kid who fell asleep dreaming about eruptions and science, and a woman who knew about funnels. This fragile, impossible, expanding thing that used to be just the two of them and was now becoming something bigger. Wednesday morning, pitch day. Ethan woke at 5:30, his body vibrating with the pre-presentation adrenaline that every creative professional knows, that mixture of confidence and terror that makes your mind sharp and your stomach unreliable. He showered, dressed in his best suit, and went to the kitchen where Margaret was already making coffee. "Big day?" she said. "Huge day. You're going to be great. You don't even know what the presentation is about." "Doesn't matter. You've been working on it for weeks. You care about it more than anything you've done in years, and you're going in there with someone who believes in you. That's enough." Ethan kissed her on the cheek, grabbed his coffee, and headed for the door. Then he turned back. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Thanks. For everything. For the last 5 years. For taking care of Lily so I could take care of everything else. I don't say it enough." Margaret's eyes went soft. "You don't need to say it, but I'm glad you did. Now go. Sell some watches." The Hartwell pitch was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Pinnacle's main conference room, a glass-walled space on the 35th floor that had been designed specifically for high-stakes client presentations. The Hartwell team consisted of 5 people: the CEO, the CMO, the head of brand strategy, and 2 senior marketing directors. They arrived at 9:45, which Victoria later told Ethan was a good sign. Early arrivals meant genuine interest. Ethan's role in the pitch was the creative presentation, the campaign concept, the visual identity, the emotional narrative that would tie everything together. Victoria handled the business case, the market analysis, the financial projections, the partnership terms. The rest of the Pinnacle team filled supporting roles, but the core of the presentation was the two of them, working in tandem the way they'd been working for weeks. It went well. It went better than well. Ethan presented the campaign concept, Arrive, built around the emotional truth they'd identified together. That luxury, for a new generation, wasn't about status or heritage. It was about the private, personal moment of deciding you deserved something beautiful. The hero visuals were exactly what he'd fought for. Real moments, real context, real people wearing Hartwell watches in the middle of actual lives. The campaign video played last. 60 seconds. No voiceover, no text, just images and a piano score. A woman checking the time on her Hartwell while waiting for a first date. A man looking at his wrist during a quiet moment at a work party. The watch catching light. Two friends laughing at a cafe. One of them absent-mindedly touching her watch the way you touch something that means something to you. The final image. An empty table at a restaurant. A single Hartwell watch lying next to a glass of wine. The tagline appearing in clean white text. Arrive. The room was silent when the video ended. Not the awkward silence of confusion or the polite silence of disinterest. The good silence. The silence that means something landed. The Hartwell CEO, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Cho, looked at her CMO, then at Victoria, then at Ethan. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Victoria glanced at Ethan. The glance lasted half a second, but it contained entire volumes. "It came from asking a different question," Victoria said. "Instead of asking what luxury means to our brand, we asked what it means to the person wearing it. The answer was personal, so the campaign is personal." "The video," Margaret Cho said. "Who directed the concept?" "That was Ethan Parker, our creative director on this campaign," Victoria said. Margaret Cho looked at Ethan. "It made me feel something I can't quite name. That's rare in a pitch." Ethan thought about the dare Victoria had written on that brief weeks ago. Make someone feel something they can't name, and had to physically stop himself from grinning. "That was the goal," he said. The Hartwell team asked 30 minutes of follow-up questions. They requested additional data on the media buying strategy. They discussed timeline and deliverables. And then Margaret Cho did something that, according to Victoria, almost never happened in a pitch meeting. She said yes in the room. "We'd like to move forward with Pinnacle," she said, "pending contract review, but consider this a verbal commitment. When can we start?" The room erupted in the kind of controlled professional jubilation that passes for celebration in corporate settings. Firm handshakes, broad smiles, the careful suppression of the urge to actually cheer. Ethan shook hands with the Hartwell team, accepted congratulations from his colleagues, and caught Victoria's eye across the conference table. She was smiling, not the professional smile, not the boardroom smile, the real one, the one that reached her eyes and softened her whole face, and made her look like the woman who'd told Lily about Dr. Carrots. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The look was enough. After the Hartwell team left, the Pinnacle conference room filled with the celebratory chaos of a team that had just landed the biggest account in years. Rachel Kim hugged Ethan. The production team high-fived each other. Someone produced a bottle of champagne that had apparently been stashed in the break room refrigerator for exactly this occasion. Victoria stayed for 15 minutes, accepted congratulations with gracious composure, and then excused herself. She caught Ethan's eye on her way out and gave the smallest nod. Tomorrow. The board meeting. The real fight. He found her in her office an hour later. She was standing at the windows, looking out at the river, and for a moment she looked so much like she had on that first morning when she'd summoned him to this office after the wrong text, that Ethan felt the full weight of how far they'd traveled since then. "We got Hartwell," he said. "We got Hartwell. How does it feel?" Victoria turned around. Her eyes were bright, and there was color in her cheeks, and she looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. "It feels like proof," she said. "Proof that the company isn't failing because of my leadership. It's failing because someone has been deliberately undermining it. And now we have a victory that Leonard can't explain away. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we end this." Victoria spent that evening in her apartment with Helen Carver, preparing for the board meeting. Ethan went home, had dinner with Lily and Margaret, read 2 chapters of the detective chemistry book, and put Lily to bed. Then he sat in the living room and called Victoria. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Terrified, she said, but the useful kind, the kind that makes you sharper. What's your biggest worry? That the board won't believe it. That they'll look at 22 years of Leonard's service and weigh it against 2 years of my evidence and decide that loyalty matters more than truth. And if they do, then I resign. I walk away from Pinnacle and I start over somewhere else. I refuse to lead a company that protects the person destroying it. The steel in her voice was absolute. Ethan had heard Victoria Sterling sound determined before, sound angry, sound resolved. But this was different. This was a woman who had found the bottom of what she was willing to tolerate and had decided with perfect clarity that she would rather lose everything than pretend. You won't have to resign, Ethan said. You can't know that. No, but I believe it. The evidence is clear. Helen has built an airtight presentation, and you're the best CEO Pinnacle has ever had, even when someone was actively sabotaging you. Tomorrow, the board is going to see that. You sound very sure. I'm very stubborn. Ask my mother. Victoria laughed softly. Ethan? Yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these last few months, the campaign, the work, us, it's the first time in my career that I've felt like I'm not fighting alone. That matters more than you know. Ethan closed his eyes. The warmth in her voice traveled through the phone and settled somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where grief had lived for so long that he'd forgotten it could hold anything else. You're not alone, he said. You're stuck with me now. And Lily, and Professor Whiskers, and probably my mother who's been asking when you're coming to dinner. After tomorrow. Tell Margaret I'll bring wine. She'll insist on making her brisket. Fair warning, she'll also interrogate you. She was a high school English teacher for 30 years. She's trained in extracting information from unwilling subjects. I've survived hostile board meetings. I think I can handle a retired English teacher. You have clearly never met Margaret Parker. They said goodnight. Ethan stayed on the couch for a while after, thinking about tomorrow. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Helen would be there as outside counsel. Victoria would present the evidence, and Ethan would be in the building, available if needed, carrying the weight of what he'd found and the hope that it would be enough. Thursday, 2 p.m., the Pinnacle boardroom. Ethan wasn't in the room. He was downstairs in his office, staring at his computer screen without seeing it, refreshing his email every 30 seconds, even though he knew Victoria wouldn't email him during the meeting. His phone sat face up on the desk. Every time it buzzed with anything, a spam notification, a text from Marcus, a weather alert. His heart rate spiked and then crashed. Marcus had texted him at noon. You okay? You've been weird all week. Big day at work. Tell you about it later. Is this the nightmare boss stuff? It's the opposite of nightmare boss stuff. It's actually nightmare other guy stuff. That is genuinely unclear, but I support you anyway. Thanks, Marcus. That's why you're my emergency text contact. Wait, I thought your mom was your emergency contact. She's my emergency call contact. You're my emergency text contact. There's a hierarchy. The banter helped. It loosened the knot in Ethan's stomach just enough to let him breathe. But when his phone buzzed again at 3:17 p.m. and the screen showed Victoria's name, he grabbed it so fast he nearly knocked his coffee off the desk. The message was 4 words. Come to my office. Ethan took the elevator to the executive floor. The hallway was quiet, eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that follows something seismic. Diane was at her desk outside Victoria's office, and her expression was carefully neutral in a way that told Ethan absolutely nothing. Go in, Diane said. Victoria was sitting behind her desk. Helen Carver was in one of the leather chairs, packing documents into a briefcase. Victoria's face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes had the bright, exhausted look of someone who has just come through something enormous and hasn't yet processed it. What happened? Ethan asked. Victoria looked at him. Then she smiled, not the controlled smile, not the professional smile, but a wide, unguarded, slightly wild smile that transformed her entire face. Leonard resigned before we even finished presenting. He saw the evidence, the email chains, the server logs, the pattern analysis, and he knew it was over. He tried to bluster for about 10 minutes, accused me of fabricating the documents, accused me of conducting a personal vendetta. He even suggested that my personal relationship with a subordinate, she glanced at Ethan, demonstrated the kind of poor judgment that should concern the board. And? And then Helen showed the independently verified metadata analysis, and two of the board members who had been sympathetic to Leonard asked him directly whether the emails were genuine. He couldn't deny it. The timestamps matched his login records. The IP addresses traced to his home office. Helen Carver snapped her briefcase shut. He resigned effective immediately, with the understanding that the company reserves the right to pursue legal action for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate espionage. His attorney will negotiate the terms over the coming weeks, but functionally, he's done. Ethan stood in the doorway, absorbing this. The months of tension, the midnight discovery, the careful planning, the fear that it wouldn't work. All of it compressing into a single moment of resolution that felt both enormous and strangely quiet. The board voted unanimously to affirm my position as CEO, Victoria said, including the members who had been in Leonard's camp. They also approved my proposal for an independent audit of all accounts lost during the period of Leonard's information leaks, and they agreed to a comprehensive review of corporate governance policies. So it's over, Ethan said. The Leonard part is over. The rebuilding part is just starting. Helen excused herself, shaking Ethan's hand on her way out. You found the evidence, she told him. That took courage. It took accidentally clicking on the wrong folder, actually. Helen smiled. In my experience, accidental discoveries require just as much courage to follow through on as intentional ones. More, sometimes. When they were alone, Victoria stood up from her desk and walked to the windows. She pressed her forehead against the glass, and for a moment she looked not like a CEO who had just won a corporate war, but like a woman who was very, very tired. Ethan crossed the room and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel his presence, and waited. 2 years, she said softly. 2 years of board meetings where I defended my record against losses that weren't my fault. 2 years of sleepless nights wondering if I was actually bad at this. 2 years of Leonard smiling at me across the table while he was burning down everything I built. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. And then, for the first time since Ethan had known her, Victoria Sterling cried. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't sob or collapse or make a sound. She just stood at the window with tears running silently down her face, her arms wrapped around herself, finally letting out what she'd been carrying alone for longer than anyone should have had to. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, slowly at first, like she wasn't sure the gesture was allowed, then fully, her weight settling against his side. You said you'd fall apart later, Ethan said quietly. It's later. Victoria half laughed, half cried. I did say that. So fall apart. I'm not going anywhere. She turned her face into his shoulder and let herself break. Not for long, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5. Just enough to release the pressure valve on years of accumulated isolation and doubt and the exhausting, invisible labor of being strong in rooms full of people who wanted her to fail. When she pulled back, her eyes were red and her mascara was smudged and her composure was thoroughly dismantled. She looked, Ethan thought, more beautiful than she'd ever looked in her life. I'm a mess, she said. You're human. I have mascara on your suit jacket. It's my second best suit. The good one was yesterday, for the pitch. Victoria laughed, a real, full, messy laugh that sounded like release and relief and the beginning of something lighter. Take me home, she said. I don't want to be in this building tonight. Ethan didn't take her to her apartment. He took her to his house. Margaret opened the door and took one look at Victoria. The red eyes, the disheveled hair, the expression of a woman who had just fought the hardest battle of her career and won, and did what Margaret Parker always did when someone arrived at her door looking lost. She fed her. Lily appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, holding Professor Whiskers, and stopped when she saw Victoria. You're here, Lily said, with the simple delight of a child whose wish has been granted without having to ask. I'm here, Victoria said. Her voice was rough, but she was smiling. Are you staying for dinner? If that's okay with you. Lily walked over to Victoria, took her hand, and led her to the kitchen table. You can sit next to me. I saved you a seat. She hadn't saved a seat. There were only 4 chairs at the kitchen table, same as always. But Lily said it with such conviction that nobody corrected her, and Victoria sat down in the chair next to the 8-year-old who thought she was a secret scientist, and Margaret brought out plates, and Ethan stood in the doorway of his own kitchen watching 3 generations of his world absorb a fourth. And the feeling in his chest was so full and so fragile that he was afraid to breathe too hard in case it shattered. They ate Margaret's brisket. Lily showed Victoria her A-plus volcano report and the latest entry in her insect field guide, a moth she'd named Lady Sparkle. Margaret asked Victoria exactly 3 pointed questions about her childhood, her education, and her opinion on public school funding, and seemed satisfied with all 3 answers. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Victoria her room. Ethan heard them through the door, Lily explaining every poster, every book, every item in her collection with the exhaustive thoroughness of a museum curator. Victoria's voice, quieter than Lily's, asking questions and laughing at answers. Margaret stood beside Ethan in the hallway, listening. "She's good with Lily," Margaret said. "Yeah. And Lily's good with her. That doesn't happen by accident." "I know." Margaret touched his arm. "Your father would have liked her. He always respected people who fought for things." Ethan felt the familiar sting behind his eyes. He blinked it away. "Sarah would have liked her too. Sarah would have loved her. Sarah had a thing for people who pretended to be tougher than they were." Ethan laughed. It came out wet and uneven, and Margaret pretended not to notice. Victoria emerged from Lily's room 30 minutes later. Lily had fallen asleep mid-sentence, apparently in the middle of explaining the mating habits of fireflies. "She passed out while telling me about bioluminescence," Victoria said. "I'm not sure if I should be offended. That's actually a compliment. She only falls asleep around people she's comfortable with." They stood in the hallway, Ethan and Victoria and Margaret, who was watching the 2 of them with an expression of careful, hopeful assessment. "I should go," Victoria said. "I have about 40 emails to respond to and a company to restructure." "Or," Margaret said, "you could stay. The couch is comfortable, and I make very good pancakes." Victoria looked at Margaret, then at Ethan, then back at Margaret. "I haven't had someone make me pancakes since I was 12, she said. "Then you're overdue. I'll get you a blanket." Margaret disappeared down the hall. Victoria looked at Ethan with an expression that was equal parts grateful and overwhelmed. "Your mother just adopted me," she said. "She does that. It's non-negotiable." "I don't know how to do this, Ethan. The family thing, the dinners and the bedtime stories and the falling asleep on someone's couch. I've never had this." "Neither did I, until I did. You learn as you go." Victoria reached up and touched his face, a gesture so tender and so unlike anything he'd have imagined from the woman who'd once made him feel like he was being appraised, like a painting that it made his breath catch. "Thank you," she said, "for finding the emails, for standing by me, for bringing me home." "This is just the beginning," Ethan said. "The hard stuff and the good stuff. It's all just starting." Victoria kissed him. It was different from the first time, slower, softer, without the urgency of that late-night office confession. This was a kiss that had time, that wasn't afraid of being caught or judged or interrupted. It was a kiss between 2 people standing in a dimly lit hallway in a house that smelled like brisket and children's shampoo, choosing each other with full knowledge of how complicated that choice was. Margaret returned with a blanket and pillow, pointedly cleared her throat, and said, "Pancakes at 7:30. Don't be late." Then she went to bed, leaving them alone in the hallway with the sound of Lily's breathing drifting through the cracked bedroom door. 7:30, Victoria said. "I can do 7:30. She means it. If you're late, the pancakes get passive-aggressive." "How does a pancake get passive-aggressive?" "She makes them smaller. It's her way of expressing disapproval." Victoria laughed quietly. Then she took the blanket and pillow, settled onto the couch in the living room, and looked up at Ethan with an expression that held no mask, no performance, no calculation, just a woman, tired and grateful and cautiously, terrifyingly happy. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Victoria." He went to his room, lay down in the dark, and listened to the sounds of his house. Margaret's bedroom door closing, the heater ticking, Lily mumbling in her sleep. And now, underneath all of it, a new sound, The quiet breathing of someone on the couch in the living room, someone who had fought her way through a war and ended up here, in his home, surrounded by his family, folded into the ordinary fabric of his life as naturally as if she'd always been there. Ethan closed his eyes. The fear was still there. Of course it was. Fear of what came next, of how the company would react, of whether they could actually build what they were attempting to build. But beside the fear, taking up more and more space with every passing day, was something stronger. It felt like arriving. The pancakes were not passive-aggressive. Victoria was at the kitchen table at 7:28, 2 minutes early, with her hair still damp from the shower Margaret had insisted she take, and wearing a borrowed sweater of Ethan's that was 2 sizes too large and made her look like a completely different person. Not the CEO of Pinnacle Media Group, not the woman who had stared down a boardroom full of executives the day before. Just a woman sitting at a kitchen table in an oversized sweater, watching a retired English teacher flip pancakes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been feeding people for 4 decades. Lily appeared at 7:35, still in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She stopped in the doorway, saw Victoria, and her face split into a grin so wide it displaced the sleepiness entirely. "You stayed," Lily said. "I stayed." "Did you sleep on the couch?" "I did." "Was it comfortable?" "Very comfortable." Lily climbed into the chair beside Victoria and leaned against her arm with the unselfconscious affection of a child who has decided, without analysis or deliberation, that someone belongs. Victoria went still for a moment, the kind of stillness that comes from receiving something you didn't know how to ask for. And then she put her arm around Lily's shoulders and held her there. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee and watched the scene and felt his heart do something complicated and irreversible. Margaret set a plate of pancakes in front of Victoria. They were full-sized, generous even. "She likes you," Ethan said later when Lily had gone to get dressed for school and Margaret was loading the dishwasher. "Lily?" "My mother." The pancakes were full-sized. That's the Margaret Parker seal of approval. Victoria smiled into her coffee. "I passed the test?" "You passed the test. Now the hard part starts." "The hard part was yesterday." "No, yesterday was the dramatic part. The hard part is everything after, the rebuilding, the daily stuff, the part where you actually have to live the life you fought for." Victoria looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The recognition of a truth she'd been too busy surviving to articulate. "When did you get wise?" she asked. "I'm not wise. I'm a single dad who's had 5 years of practice doing hard things one day at a time. Wisdom is just exhaustion with better PR." The weeks that followed Leonard's removal were messy in the way that real institutional change is always messy. Not the clean, triumphant kind of transformation you see in movies, where one dramatic moment fixes everything, but the grinding, incremental, sometimes tedious kind where you discover that every problem you solve reveals 3 more problems hidden behind it. The independent audit Victoria had requested uncovered the full scope of Leonard's betrayal. Over the course of 2 years, he had leaked confidential information on 11 separate client campaigns, resulting in an estimated $14 million in lost revenue. He'd also cultivated relationships with 3 other board members by offering them early access to insider financial projections. Not enough to constitute securities fraud, but enough to create a web of informal obligations that had made his position seem untouchable. The board members who'd been receiving Leonard's favors were identified and quietly removed through a series of governance reforms that Victoria pushed through with the kind of determined, methodical energy that Ethan had come to recognize as her natural operating frequency. She wasn't vindictive about it. She didn't grandstand or gloat. She simply rebuilt the system, piece by piece, replacing compromised structures with ones that could bear weight honestly. New ethics policies, a whistleblower protection program, a restructured board with term limits and mandatory conflict of interest disclosures, an external compliance officer who reported directly to the board rather than to any individual executive. Each change was practical, each was necessary, and each met resistance from people who preferred the comfortable dysfunction of the old system to the uncomfortable accountability of the new one. People don't resist change because they like how things are. Victoria told Ethan one evening, sitting on the floor of his living room with her laptop balanced on the coffee table and a glass of wine she hadn't touched. They resist it because change means admitting that how things were wasn't working, and that admission has a cost. What kind of cost? It means everyone who was part of the old system has to ask themselves what they missed, what they tolerated, what they chose not to see. She paused. I'm asking myself those questions too. I worked alongside Leonard for 2 years. I sat in meetings with him. I listened to his concerns and took them seriously. I never once considered that he might be the source of the problems he was describing. That's not a failure. That's trust. Trust without verification is just naivety. And verification without trust is paranoia. You have to have both, and sometimes you get the balance wrong. That's not weakness. That's being human. Victoria picked up her wine and took a sip. You're doing it again. Doing what? Saying things that are true and expecting me to deal with it. Is it still annoying? Less annoying. More necessary. Ethan's transfer to a different division happened 6 weeks after the HR disclosure. It was voluntary, technically, though Victoria had made it clear that the structural separation was non-negotiable if they wanted their relationship to survive the scrutiny of the reformed board and the company's new ethics framework. I can't advocate for you professionally and be with you personally, she said. Not in the same reporting chain. The conflict of interest is real, regardless of how well we manage it. I know. You're not upset? I'm a creative director. I can direct creativity from any department. What I can't do from any department is date the CEO while she's technically my boss's boss's boss. The transfer makes sense. You're being very rational about this. I had a good teacher. Terrifying, but good. Victoria threw a pillow at him. It was the most undignified thing he'd ever seen her do, and he loved it. The transfer moved Ethan to Pinnacle's Brand Partnerships division, where he led creative strategy for a portfolio of mid-tier accounts that didn't intersect with Victoria's direct oversight. The work was different, less high-profile, more client-facing, requiring a different kind of creative problem-solving. Some of his former colleagues expressed surprise. A few expressed concern. Rachel Kim, who had become something like a friend during the Hartwell campaign, pulled him aside in the break room. "Are you okay with this?" she asked. "The transfer?" More than okay. Because people are talking. People are always talking. That's literally what people do. They're saying you got moved because of the relationship with Victoria, that she's protecting you by putting you somewhere safe. And what do you think? Rachel considered this. I think you're the first person I've ever seen her actually listen to. And I think the Hartwell campaign was the best work this company has produced in years. And I think if the price of that is you sitting in a different department, it's a bargain. That's a very diplomatic answer. I'm an account director. Diplomacy is my whole thing. The rumors circulated for a while, as rumors do, distorting, exaggerating, filling in gaps with speculation where information was thin. Some people thought Ethan had been demoted. Others thought he'd been promoted to a secret role. A few conspiracy-minded souls believed the entire Leonard situation had been orchestrated by Victoria as a power grab, with Ethan as her willing accomplice. Ethan and Victoria didn't address the rumors directly. They didn't issue statements or hold meetings or try to control the narrative. They simply showed up every day, did their work, and let the quality of that work speak for itself. Over time, the rumors faded the way most office gossip does. Not because the truth was finally accepted, but because newer, more interesting gossip replaced it. What didn't fade was the change in the company itself. Under Victoria's restructured leadership, Pinnacle began winning again. The Hartwell campaign launched to industry acclaim and commercial success, generating coverage in trade publications and attracting new client inquiries at a rate the company hadn't seen in years. 2 accounts that had been lost during Leonard's sabotage period, Belmont and Skyward, returned after learning about the espionage investigation, their departure now recontextualized as the result of a rigged competition rather than Pinnacle's inadequacy. Victoria didn't celebrate publicly. But one evening, after the Belmont re-signing was announced internally, she called Ethan from her office. "Belmont is back," she said. "I heard. Congratulations." It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like recovering something that was stolen. That's still a victory, just a different kind. The angry kind. Nothing wrong with angry victories, they tend to stick. Meanwhile, Lily was growing up, not in the dramatic, overnight way that makes parents panic, but in the slow, accumulating way that you only notice when you stop and compare the child in front of you to the child in your memory. She turned 9 in September, celebrating with a birthday party in Ethan's backyard that involved a science-themed obstacle course, a volcano cake that Margaret spent 2 days constructing, and a guest list of 11 loud, energetic third graders who consumed their collective body weight in pizza and juice boxes. Victoria came to the party. She arrived in jeans and a t-shirt, an outfit so far removed from her corporate persona that several of Lily's friends' parents did visible double takes, and spent 3 hours helping run the obstacle course, judging a rock painting competition, and engaging in a deeply serious conversation with Lily's best friend Emma about whether octopuses were smarter than dolphins. Octopuses, Victoria declared, they can open jars. Can a dolphin open a jar? Dolphins can do tricks, Emma countered. Tricks are just following instructions. Opening jars is problem solving. That's real intelligence. Emma considered this, then nodded with the gravity of someone whose worldview had just been permanently altered. Ethan watched from the porch with Marcus, who had come to the party ostensibly to help set up, but primarily to observe the CEO of a major advertising firm arguing about cephalopod intelligence with a 9-year-old. So that's the nightmare, Marcus said. That's Victoria. She's arguing about octopuses. She's very competitive. I can see that. Marcus took a sip of his beer. She fits, man. I wasn't sure she would, but she does. What do you mean? I mean she fits here. In your life, with Lily, with your mom, with the whole thing. He gestured at the backyard. The kids running, Victoria kneeling beside Emma with an expression of intense biological debate. Margaret handing out cake slices with the efficient authority of a 4-star general managing a supply chain. It doesn't look forced. It just looks like your family got bigger. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Marcus was right, and they both knew it. The transition from Victoria, who comes to dinner, to Victoria, who is part of the family, happened gradually, without formal announcement or dramatic declaration. She started spending weekends at Ethan's house, then most weekday evenings. She kept a toothbrush in the bathroom and a change of clothes in the closet and a specific mug, the blue one with the chipped handle, that became hers by unspoken agreement. Lily adjusted with the fearless adaptability of children who are loved enough to be secure. Victoria's presence didn't replace anything in Lily's world. It added. Victoria helped with homework, not just science, but math and reading and the occasional social studies project that required someone to explain how trade policy worked in terms a 9-year-old could grasp. She attended school events, arriving in her work clothes and looking slightly out of place among the other parents in their jeans and windbreakers, but present, always present. She's like a different kind of mom, Lily told Ethan one night, unprompted, while he was brushing her hair before bed. Not a replacement mom, more like a bonus one. A bonus mom? Yeah, like bonus levels in a video game. Extra. Is that a good thing? Bonus levels are always good, Daddy. They're the best part. Ethan stored that conversation somewhere safe inside himself in the growing collection of moments that proved he hadn't made a mistake. That the risk of letting someone in, of allowing his carefully controlled life to expand beyond its fortified borders, had been worth every terrifying second. But the expansion wasn't frictionless. There were hard days. Days when Victoria's corporate responsibilities collided with family plans, and someone had to be disappointed. Days when Lily wanted attention that Victoria was too drained to give after a 12-hour board session. Days when Ethan felt the old guilt surging back, the voice that said he was dividing himself too thin, that Lily deserved a father who was fully present instead of a father who was building a new relationship while still carrying the ghost of an old one. The ghost of Sarah was always there. Not haunting, exactly. More like a presence woven into the architecture of their lives. In the framed photo on Lily's nightstand, in the recipes Margaret still cooked from Sarah's handwritten cards, in the way Lily sometimes tilted her head at an angle that was so precisely Sarah that Ethan's breath would catch without warning. Victoria understood this. She didn't compete with Sarah's memory or try to minimize it. She occupied her own space, a new room in a house that had been built by someone else, furnished with her own things, connected to the existing structure, but distinctly her own. "I'm not trying to be Lily's mother," she told Ethan one night, lying beside him in the dark. "Sarah was her mother. That doesn't change because I'm here." "I know. But I want to be something to her. I want her to know she can count on me." "She already knows that. She calls you her bonus mom." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She does?" "Like a bonus level. Extra. Apparently that's the highest compliment in 9-year-old terminology." Another silence, then very softly, "I've never been anyone's bonus anything before." "Get used to it." Margaret moved out in November. Not dramatically. She didn't announce it or make a scene. She simply informed Ethan one Sunday afternoon that she'd found an apartment 3 blocks away and would be moving at the end of the month. "You don't have to go," Ethan said, genuinely alarmed. "There's room. We'll make room." "There's plenty of room. That's not why I'm leaving." Margaret folded her hands in her lap with the composed certainty of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in having it debated. "You have a family now, Ethan, a real growing, complicated family that needs its own space. You don't need your mother sleeping down the hall anymore." "But Lily has you and Victoria and an entire network of people who love her. She doesn't need her grandmother under the same roof. She needs her grandmother 3 blocks away, available for sleepovers and emergency pancakes and all the grandmotherly functions that work better with a little distance. Mom, this is the right thing, and you know it. You've been taking care of me for 5 years because you felt guilty asking for help. Now you have help, real help, the kind that shows up at birthday parties and argues about octopuses and sleeps on your couch wearing your sweater." She looked at him with eyes that were bright and fierce and full of the particular love that parents carry, the love that knows when to hold on and when to step back. "Let me go, sweetheart. Not far, just far enough," Ethan cried. Not much. A few tears that he wiped away quickly, embarrassed even though it was just Margaret. She pretended not to see, which was her way of granting him dignity while still being completely aware of everything. Margaret's apartment was small, cheerful, and exactly 3 blocks away. She came over for dinner 4 nights a week, babysat whenever needed, and maintained her role as the family's emotional infrastructure with the seamless competence of someone who had been doing it for decades. The only real change was that now, when she left at the end of the evening, Ethan closed the door behind her and turned to find Victoria on the couch and Lily on the floor, and a house that was his in a way it hadn't been before, fully, deliberately chosen. Winter passed. Spring came. The city thawed, and with it the last of the tension that had surrounded the Leonard Graves situation. The legal proceedings concluded with a confidential settlement that barred Leonard from the advertising industry and required restitution for damages. The company's stock price, which had dipped during the initial news of the espionage investigation, recovered and then surpassed its previous high. Industry analysts credited the turnaround to Victoria's restructuring and the success of the Hartwell campaign, which had won 3 Addy Awards and generated a case study that was being taught in 2 business schools. Ethan's work in the brand partnerships division had flourished in ways he hadn't anticipated. Free from the intensity of the Hartwell campaign, he'd found a steadier rhythm, one that allowed him to be creative without being consumed, to be excellent without being absent. He left the office by 6 most evenings. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He attended every school event. And when the work did get intense, when deadlines tightened and clients demanded more, Victoria was there, not to take over, but to hold the other end of the rope. Partnership, she called it once during a conversation about how they divided responsibilities. Not balance. Balance implies everything has to be equal all the time. Partnership means sometimes one person carries more, and that's okay because you take turns. "Where'd you learn that?" Ethan asked. "Your mother. She told me during one of our Wednesday lunches." "You have Wednesday lunches with my mother?" "We have standing Wednesday lunches. She's teaching me how to make brisket." "Since when?" "Since January." "You didn't notice because you're not as observant as you think you are." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, and realized that 2 of the most formidable women in his life had formed an alliance without his knowledge or consent. This was either wonderful or terrifying, and he hadn't figured out which yet. It was a Friday evening in May when Ethan drove to a small jewelry store on the north side that he'd been visiting in secret for 3 weeks. The ring was simple, a thin platinum band with a single diamond, not ostentatious, not flashy. Victoria didn't wear flashy things. She wore things that were precise and intentional and quietly beautiful, like the woman herself. But before he could plan anything, he needed to talk to Lily. He took her to the lake that Saturday morning, just the two of them, the way they used to go before Victoria, before the campaign, before everything changed. They sat on their usual bench near the water and shared a bag of cinnamon almonds from the cart vendor, and Ethan watched the sun hit the lake and tried to figure out how to ask a 9-year-old for permission to reshape their family. Lily beat him to it. "You're going to ask Victoria to marry you," she said, as casually as if she were announcing the weather. Ethan turned to stare at her. "How did you—" "Grandma told me." "Grandma doesn't know." "Grandma knows everything, Daddy. She said you've been acting nervous for 2 weeks and you keep checking your jacket pocket when you think nobody's looking." Lily bit into an almond. "She also said you're a terrible secret keeper." Her words. Ethan made a mental note to have a serious conversation with Margaret about operational security. "So," he said, "how would you feel about that? If Victoria became more officially part of our family?" Lily chewed thoughtfully. She had Sarah's habit of taking her time with important questions, not rushing to answer, letting the thought fully form before releasing it. "I think Mom would be okay with it," she said. The words hit Ethan somewhere deep and vital, in a place he didn't know was still tender until Lily touched it. "You think so?" "Yeah, she'd want you to be happy. She always wanted you to be happy. And Victoria makes you happy. I can tell because you sing in the shower now, and you didn't used to do that." "I sing in the shower. Badly. But you do it, which means you're happy. So yeah, I think you should ask her." Ethan put his arm around his daughter and held her against his side. This extraordinary small person who had lost her mother at 3 and grown into someone kind and brave and perceptive and occasionally devastating in her honesty. "I love you, kid." "I love you too, Daddy. Can I help plan the proposal?" "You can help plan the proposal." "Can Professor Whiskers be involved?" "Professor Whiskers can be the ring bearer." Lily grinned. "He's going to need a tiny tuxedo." They planned it together over the next 2 weeks. Ethan and Lily, and inevitably Margaret, whose involvement in the conspiracy had been guaranteed from the moment she'd identified the jacket pocket checking. The plan was simple, because Victoria was a woman who valued substance over spectacle and would be deeply suspicious of anything overly elaborate. A rooftop dinner. Just the two of them. The building where Ethan had proposed to Sarah years ago. A detail he'd worried about, wondering if it was wrong to bring a new love to a place marked by an old one. But when he mentioned the concern to Margaret, she'd shaken her head. "It's not about the place. It's about what you do with it." Sarah proposed from that rooftop too. She proposed a life. And now you're proposing a different life from the same place because you're the same person who keeps building forward. There's nothing wrong with that. There's something right about it. The evening was warm, June in Chicago. The kind of night where the air is soft and the city lights reflect off the lake, and the skyline looks like something someone made up. Ethan had arranged a small table on the rooftop of the Caldwell building, a converted warehouse that now housed artist studios and event spaces, and one very specific memory. Victoria arrived in a dark green dress, looking simultaneously elegant and slightly confused. "Why are we on a roof?" she asked. "Because I couldn't get a reservation at the restaurant." "You're lying." "I'm absolutely lying. Come sit down." They ate dinner, Italian, from the place on Taylor Street that Victoria had declared, after extensive Chicago research, the best pasta in the city. They drank wine. They talked about work, about Lily's upcoming science fair, about Margaret's new hobby of competitive Scrabble at the senior center. Normal things. Ordinary things. The things that constitute a life. After dinner, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket Margaret had caught him checking, and pulled out a small box. Victoria saw it and went very still. "Ethan, before you say anything," he said, "I need you to know something. I'm not doing this because our life together is perfect. It's not perfect. You work too much. I worry too much. We argue about stupid things and occasionally about important things. You still can't cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs, and I still sometimes forget that you need time alone to recharge before you can be a person again." Victoria's eyes were bright. She wasn't crying, not yet, but she was close, hovering at the edge of tears the way she hovered at the edge of everything, controlled right up until the moment she chose not to be. "I'm doing this because all of that is exactly what I want. The imperfect version, the real version. The version where we show up for each other every day and figure it out as we go, and sometimes get it wrong and try again. That's what I want. That's what I'm asking for." He opened the box. The ring caught the city light. Small, precise, quietly beautiful. "Lily already approved," he added. "She wanted me to mention that. Also, Professor Whiskers sends his regards." Victoria laughed. It was a wet, uneven, thoroughly undignified laugh, the kind that comes from a place too deep for composure to reach. "You asked Lily first?" "She's the most important person in my life. Of course I asked her first." "What did she say?" "She said you make me sing in the shower. Apparently that's the standard." Victoria looked at the ring, then she looked at Ethan. Then she looked at the Chicago skyline, the lake, the lights, the vast sprawl of a city that had witnessed every version of both their stories, from the worst chapters to this one. "Yes," she said. "Yeah?" "Yes, Ethan. Obviously, yes." He put the ring on her finger. His hands were shaking. Hers were too. They were both shaking, standing on a rooftop in the warm June air, two imperfect people choosing each other with full knowledge of how hard that choice would be and how much it was worth. He kissed her. She kissed him back. And somewhere below them, in a house 3 miles away, a 9-year-old girl was sitting up in bed, too excited to sleep, waiting for a text from her father that would tell her the answer she already knew. Ethan pulled out his phone and typed. She said, yes. Lily's response came in 4 seconds. Obviously. Tell her Professor Whiskers says congratulations, and ask her if she wants pancakes tomorrow. Victoria read the message over Ethan's shoulder and laughed until she cried. The wedding was in October, small, 30 people, held in the backyard of the house that had become theirs, Ethan's house, then Ethan and Lily's house, then Ethan and Lily and Victoria's house, the physical address of a family that had assembled itself piece by piece from broken things and accidental text messages and the stubborn refusal to stop trying. Margaret made the food. Marcus was the best man. Lily was the flower girl, which she informed everyone was kind of basic, but agreed to do because someone has to throw the petals, and Professor Whiskers doesn't have thumbs. Rachel Kim came, and Diane Chen, and a handful of Victoria's college friends who seemed genuinely shocked to see her laughing and relaxed and wearing a white dress in a backyard instead of a suit in a boardroom. Helen Carver came too, and raised a glass during the toasts, and said simply, "To the 2 bravest people I've ever represented." Victoria's mother flew in from Connecticut. She was a small, precise woman named Eleanor who looked at Ethan with the same evaluating gaze Victoria used in business meetings. Apparently the look was genetic. And then, after 20 minutes of conversation, declared him adequate. Victoria later explained that from Eleanor Sterling, adequate was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The ceremony was brief. They'd written their own vows, which Victoria had initially resisted because she said she was better with quarterly projections than emotional declarations. But what she produced was, in Ethan's biased opinion, the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. "I spent most of my life believing that strength meant doing everything alone," she said, standing in the backyard with the afternoon sun in her hair and Ethan's hands in hers. "I built my career alone. I fought my battles alone. I came home to an empty apartment every night and told myself that was the price of success. And then a man who couldn't even text the right person showed me that strength isn't about isolation. It's about letting someone see you, the real you, the scared, messy, imperfect you, and choosing to stay anyway." Ethan's vows were shorter because he started crying halfway through and had to improvise. "I had my life figured out," he said. "It was small, and it was safe, and it was organized around making sure nothing ever hurt me again. And then I sent a really stupid text message, and you turned my entire world upside down, and I discovered that the life I'd figured out was actually just the life I'd settled for." He paused, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and looked at Lily, who was watching from the front row with Professor Whiskers in her lap. "You gave me back the part of myself I'd locked away. The part that takes risks and fights for things and believes that the best stuff in life is never safe. It's messy and it's scary and it's worth every single second. Lily cried too. Margaret cried. Marcus cried, which he would deny later and continue denying for the rest of his natural life. After the ceremony, after the food and the toasts and the dancing and the moment where Lily insisted on a group photo with Professor Whiskers positioned prominently in the center, Ethan and Victoria stood at the edge of the backyard and looked at the scene they'd created. Their friends, their family, their daughter, theirs now, in every way that mattered, chasing fireflies with Emma near the fence, while Marcus attempted to teach Margaret's Scrabble friends how to do the electric slide. 1 year ago, Victoria said, I was sitting in my office alone at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, reviewing quarterly numbers that had been sabotaged by someone I trusted, wondering how much longer I could keep doing this. And now I'm standing in a backyard watching an otter in a tuxedo get photographed. Ethan laughed. That's the condensed version. The expanded version involves falling in love with someone who accidentally insulted me via text, discovering corporate espionage at midnight, winning the biggest campaign of my career, gaining a daughter who thinks I'm a secret scientist, being adopted by a retired English teacher, and learning that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. She paused. Also learning what a rogue climbing wall is. That's a lot for 1 year. That's a lot for one lifetime. They stood together in the warm October evening, and the noise of the party washed over them. Laughter and music and the high, bright sound of Lily's voice calling for Ethan to come see the firefly she'd caught. Coming, he called back, then to Victoria. Ready? For what? For everything. The good parts, the hard parts, the parts where Lily becomes a teenager and we both lose our minds. The boring Tuesday nights and the arguments about whose turn it is to cook and the science fairs and the homework and the whole enormous, exhausting, beautiful thing. Victoria took his hand. Her ring caught the light. The small, precise diamond that he'd chosen because it looked like her, understated and brilliant. I've been ready since the text message, she said. Ethan grinned. That was a really stupid text message. It was the best text message anyone's ever sent me. The one where I called you a nightmare. The one where you were honest, even by accident. She squeezed his hand. Especially by accident. They walked across the yard toward their daughter, who was holding a firefly in cupped hands, and explaining its bioluminescence to anyone who would listen. Behind them, the house was warm and lit. Ahead of them, Lily was glowing, not metaphorically, but actually glowing, the firefly casting a tiny green light through her fingers. Look, Lily said, holding up her hands. She lights up. Just like that. No batteries or anything. Ethan knelt beside her. Victoria knelt on the other side. The three of them looked at the small insect pulsing with its own quiet radiance, doing what it had always done, shining in the dark, because that was its nature. Not because anyone asked it to, not because it was performing or trying to impress or afraid of what would happen if it stopped. Just shining, simply, because it could. Let her go, Lily said. She opened her hands. The firefly lifted, hovered for a moment, and then drifted upward into the October sky, joining dozens of others in the yard, each one a small point of moving light in the gathering dusk. Ethan stood up. Victoria stood beside him. Lily grabbed both their hands and held on, the way children do when they want to make sure the people they love aren't going anywhere. They weren't going anywhere. That was the thing about this story, the thing that made it worth telling, worth living through, worth every terrifying and beautiful and imperfect moment. It didn't start with a grand plan or a destined meeting or two people who were obviously meant to find each other. It started with a mistake. A tired, careless, human mistake made at the end of a long day by a man who wasn't paying attention. And from that mistake, one thing led to another. The way it always does, the way life always works when you stop trying to control it and start letting it happen. A wrong text became a conversation. A conversation became a partnership. A partnership became a friendship. A friendship became love. Love became a family. Not a perfect family. Not a family without scars or ghosts or complicated histories. A real family. The kind that argues about who ate the last of the cereal and negotiates bedtimes and forgets to buy milk and remembers every important thing. The kind that is built not from luck or fate, but from the daily, unglamorous, essential act of showing up for each other. Ethan Parker had spent 5 years surviving. He'd done it well. Kept his daughter fed and loved, kept his career intact, kept the machinery of his life running through sheer stubbornness and the unwavering support of a mother who refused to let him quit. But surviving and living are different things. Surviving is about maintaining. Living is about expanding. And somewhere between a wrong text message and a warm October evening, Ethan had crossed from one to the other. He was no longer simply getting through his days. He was finally, fully in them.